Good morning. Clerk, please call the roll.
Senator Anderson.
Here.
Senator Guru.
Here.
Senator Nethercott.
Excused.
Senator Salazar.
Here.
Representative Henderson.
Here.
Representative Larson.
Here.
Representative Sherwood. Representative Stith.
Here.
Representative Walters.
Here.
Representative Swan and Sir Dave.
Here.
Co-Chairman Nicholas.
Here.
Chairman Kinski.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. So Co-Chairman Nicholas and I, by rule under the Joint Appropriations Committee, we're co-chairs and we rotate chairing the committee between days. I drew the short straw, so I'm going to head us off on gaming. But first, I want to see if Mr. Co-Chair has any opening comments.
No, thank you. No.
All right. The gaming agenda item is very ambitious, and I do intend to not run over on it. So I'd ask that as we go through these materials, I may periodically urge people on towards being concise and to the point, so that we can stay on our schedule. Having said that, there's a lot of important material. We really do need to understand better the gaming in Wyoming and what regulatory framework is best suited to it. So we want to get the input everybody's got to offer but just do it as concisely as possible. So with that, we're going to kick it off with Karen Vaughn, our legislative editor and associate fiscal analyst. She's got an overview and background on gaming in Wyoming. Karen, thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Karen Von Ellis, so I will do my best to make sure that we stay on schedule. Provided in your materials is a background memo prepared. I just want to let you know that that memo, the content of it is 4 pages, and the Wyoming Gaming Commission has been around for 50+ years. So it obviously only hits the highlights. And I want to let you know that if you have questions that aren't in there, I will do my best to answer them for you. But I didn't want to create a 50-page memo for you to read. The legislature created the 5-member board, parimutuel board, in 1967. And it had a very different look than what it does now. Members of the board were prohibited from having any interest in racehorses, tracks, or betting equipment, and from being breeders. They were only required to meet annually, and they held any special meetings that they could determine they needed with a quorum. They were authorized to employ a director for the racing season, which could act as their secretary treasurer for the remainder of the year. It's since changed. Of course, they have a full-time executive director and multiple staff. They were authorized to hire additional employees as were necessary to carry out their duties. And their duties were to authorize permits, supervise the conduct of races, and make rules for the control, supervision, and direction of applicants, permittees, races, race meets, and racetracks. As part of the authority, they were required to license anyone who participated. So that includes jockeys, apprentice jockeys, trainers, owners, veterinarians, and a list of about 15 to 20 different positions. In addition, the board was required to either directly by a board member or through one of its employees supervise the wagering portion itself by having someone, either the employee or the member of the board, having access to the parimutuel booth and the records to make sure that everything was as it should be. The statute required the permits to be issued for a period of 15 days. They could be issued to a county, a city, incorporated town, county fair board, or a nonprofit corporation or association approved by the county commissioners. But permits could only be issued once the question had received favor among the county voters. And the way it was put in 1967 as to the question, it was the question of race meets before the county voters. By 1970, 5 counties had approved Albany, Fremont, Laramie, Natrona, and Uena counties. In terms of proceeds back in the 1967, permittees were required to return at least 83% of the wagers to their ticket holders. A total of 7% plus breakage was to go to the board for distribution. And that was distributed to the general fund, the counties, cities, and towns where the race meets were held, as well as the gaming board for their operations. The remaining 10% was held by the permittee for their meets, their purses, and any charitable or civic functions. 2 years later, the legislature authorized a $50 per day race fee to be paid before the issuance of the permit. So the substance of what was being paid to the Gaming Commission for the operation of all of this was supplemented with this $50 fee. Excuse me. By 1971, so we're now at 4 years, the board was reconstituted as a commission, and permittee qualifications were changed. Corporations and associations were no longer required to be nonprofit. However, they did require that the officers and directors be U.S. citizens, that they be citizens and residents of the state of Wyoming for at least a year, and that at least 95% of the corporation's assets come from bona fide Wyoming citizens and residents. Fast forwarding another 4 years, the distribution was changed. Now, I don't want to mislead you. There has been interim changes in that 8 years. But in 1975, the distribution to cities, towns, and counties was eliminated, as was the distribution to the general fund. The only thing that remained was the 1% to the parimutuel fund. 19% plus breakage was returned to the permittees. And that was for their use, again, in purses and operation expense and conducting a for-profit business at that point. Moving into the 1980s, in 86, the legislature changed the structure of the parimutuel commission again. It was increased to 7 members, and they were appointed on a regional basis. So if you think about any of the other commissions, you know, we're grabbing somebody from each corner of the state to make sure that we have representation across the board. But the restriction for having any interest in horse racing and parimutuel betting was removed. Commissioners need only have resided in Wyoming for 10 years and be qualified electors in order to serve. Any commission member with a personal or private interest was required to disclose the conflict and not vote. And for the first time, the commission was authorized to delegate a portion of its authority to 3 stewards at each event. Now, the stewards have the authority to rule on outcomes, levy fines, and suspend licenses. But the interesting thing is the statute only required 1 member, 1 steward, to be a commission employee. The other 2 could be permittee employees. At the same time, the permitting process itself was overhauled. Permits were extended to 1 year, and requirements on any of the corporation's officers, directors, or capital was also eliminated. The requirement that the race meets be posed to the voters was also amended, such that the question that needed to be posed to the voters was, do they authorize parimutuel wagering? That eliminated the need for repeated initiatives once a favorable vote was achieved. Once a county had authorized parimutuel wagering, they no longer had to authorize individual events. The following year in 87, the legislature clarified the definition of parimutuel, and they included not only what I think of when I close my eyes, thoroughbred racing, harness racing, cutter racing, chariot racing, chuck wagon racing, in addition to the professional roping that had been previously added. They established the Breeders' Award Fund and funded it by reducing the minimum amount required to be paid to a ticket holder by 0.4% and requiring the permittee to remit that same 0.4% to the Breeders' Award. At the same time, the commission was authorized to access criminal history information on licensees. And in-state and out-of-state simulcasting was authorized, which is wagering on televised races. Kentucky Derby is a prime example. Simulcasting permits are restricted to pari-mutuel permittees, which means we have pari-mutuel permittees, 3 of them licensed in the state, in order to conduct live races. Those same 3 may be issued permits in order to have simulcasting. Simulcasting is only permitted on the permittee's premises unless approved by the Board of County Commissioners where it will be conducted. Multiple and exotic wagerings, which are wagers that consist of a single bet on 2 or more entries, were approved by the legislature in 91. And with it came another change in the distribution of revenues. In addition to that 19% handle that permittees were permitted to keep, on those exotic or multiple wagers, there is an additional 5% that is allowed to be held. Of that 5%, 1% is returned to the Breeders' Fund. So of that 5%, they have 4 and the Breeders' Fund has 1. The legislature opened up another avenue for placing bets in 2003 by authoring advanced deposit pari-mutuel wagers, which ADW. This allows someone to open an account with a licensee so that they can place bets in person, over the phone, or by any other electronic means. Even with all of these legislative changes that have favored Wyoming-bred horses through the Breeders' Fund, as well as multiple wagering opportunities, live horse racing in Wyoming declined to the point that in 2010, 0 live races occurred in Wyoming. The legislature implemented something called source market fees in 2011. A source market fee is a fee that's assessed to an out-of-state simulcaster when they take bets from Wyoming residents. Those market fees are distributed back to live track permittees, the in-state simulcast permittees, the pari-mutuel commission, and the Breeders' Fund. I would say as a result of that, though I can't prove it, Wyoming was able to host 4 races in 2011 and an additional 4 races in 2012. This is interesting because revenues from the time are significantly smaller than what you will see later on. If you look in your memorandum on page 3, you'll see for the first 3 years, 2010, 11, and 12, that the total handle is less than $10 million. And if you trace that across, the revenue is quite small. Because of the lack of live races in Wyoming, in 2010, all of that was from simulcasting. In 2011, 91% of it. And in 2012, 86% of it was simulcasting. So live racing only accounted for 9% in 11 and 14% in 12. The legislature gave live racing a shot in the arm in 2013. The definition of simulcasting was amended from televised live events to electronically transmitted live and historic events. And a separate distribution of revenues was established for the historic racing. Currently, 1% of the total wagers is distributed to the counties, cities, and towns where a permittee is located. 0.25% is distributed to the pari-mutuel account. Another 0.25% goes to the Legislative Stabilization Reserve account, or LSRA. And of those funds that are distributed to the pari-mutuel account, when that account exceeds $1.5 million, there's a transfer that automatically occurs quarterly to the LSRA. If you look on in that memorandum before you get to that table, you'll see that there have been a number of quarterly transfers as that fund has been able to build. The 3 in-state simulcast permittees operate 2,486 gaming terminals at 43 Wyoming locations in 2023, which are 6 more locations than were approved in 22. 2486. And although Table 1 doesn't specify the source of the handle, 98% of that is attributed from 2013 on to historic horse racing. As of now, the distribution of wagers can be complicated. If you look at the table, or if you look at the flow chart on page 5, local governments and the LSRA receive distribution from historic racing only. The Gaming Commission receives revenues from live events, historic, and source market fees, again, subject to a transfer to the LSRA. And the Breeders' Award Fund receives money from live racing and from the straight handle plus the exotic handle, and then source market fees. But it doesn't receive anything for historic racing. So it's a hodgepodge of the way that's funded. In 2020, the legislature renamed the Parimutuel Commission the Wyoming Gaming Commission. And as they did so, the Gaming Commission added 2 members. This time, the first one is required to be an active law enforcement officer, and the other is required to be a member of the Northern Arapaho or Eastern Shoshone tribe with regulatory experience at least 5 years. So these are the only 2 people that are required to have a background in either criminality or regulation. In addition, the legislature authorized 3 liaisons to the commission, 1 appointed by the President of the Senate, 1 by the Speaker of the House, and 1 by the Chief Executive. The commission in 2020 was also required to conduct a gaming study that examined the number and location of games that were operating in the state at that time, wager amounts, revenues earned, provide regulatory options for all types of games, and evaluate the impact games had on other states that had recently expanded their form of gaming. That study is also in your materials, and that's item 202. During that session, what I'm ultimately getting to is the legislature authorized skill-based gaming, which is part of why the name was changed from Parimutuel. Each operator and vendor is required to be licensed by the commission, and each terminal is required to bear a decal. In 2023, 1,247 terminals were authorized at 354 locations. That's an average of 3.5 terminals per location. State statute allows a maximum of 4 terminals at any location. And this is up from the 853 terminals at 296 locations in 22. Considering the tax scheme of this, 20% of the net proceeds from the skill-based amusement games is transferred weekly to the commission. 45% of that supports the school foundation program account, with an equal portion being transferred to local governments where the games are located. And the remaining 10% held by the commission for its operations. The revenues for skill-based amusements game you'll find on table 2 and page 4. On average, if I take the 1247 against the total, each terminal generates about $4,600 in state and local government revenue. The next step was in 2021 when the legislature authorized online sports gaming and charged the commission with regulating wagering, operators, and vendors. Of course, online sports wagering refers to wagering that's conducted by internet or computer on a digital platform, mobile application, etc. 10% of the total online sports wagers is transferred to the commission, with all but $300,000 per year being transferred to the general fund. That first $300,000 is transferred to the Department of Health to be distributed to programs that prevent and treat problem gambling, gaming behaviors. The Department of Health distributes those funds based on a 2022 estimate of the number of adults in each county and prorates the amount to each county based on that calculation. To date, 15 counties have opted to receive funding. Now, I want to make it clear, this is not a grant. They don't have to apply for it and there aren't any contracts. But because it's new, it's highly possible that there aren't other programs in place yet in the counties in order to make receipt of those funds beneficial at this point. But counties that have used the money have used it for marketing and education and the development of employee guides, work in the treatment court, as well as local mental health centers and providers to provide training efforts. In 2021, the commission authorized 3 operators, and in 2022, 3 additional. So online sports wagering has 6 authorized. And revenues from that are listed in table 3, which is also on page 4. If you look at the flow charts on page 5 and 6, I believe. I hold that by memory. Sorry, page 5 has the parimutuel wagering. 6 is the skill-based amusement games, and 7 is the online sports wagering. You'll see the difference in how those funds are distributed. It's also interesting to note that online sports wagering in its first 3 years has posted greater handles or greater net proceeds than skill-based amusement games has. But the difference in the amount of tax is because skill-based amusement games are taxed at 20%, whereas the online sports wagering is taxed at 10%. Now, if you ask where Wyoming stands on average with these, it's hard to determine for skill-based amusement games because Wyoming is one of a few states that has skill-based amusement games, but doesn't have any other form of slot machines or casino style gaming. And in that regard, when we look at that, a lot of the states tax it based on total gross receipts at the casino, which is kind of hard to peel that back. But I can tell you that the states that I have been able to get the information from that have this type of gaming, they use a total proceeds and not a terminal tax. As far as online sports wagering is concerned, Wyoming is right in there at the 10% that a lot of other states are. I've seen, I have information where some states go as low as 6 and other states go as high as 20. But by and large, the average for most states sits at about 10. Rather than get into the current regulatory conditions and that, I will leave that for others who will speak after me. I sit for any questions.
Questions for Karen? Questions? Representative Larson, please.
Thank you, Karen. I'm just trying to understand in your document there where you make the reference in 2013 where we approved historic horse racing. And then I'm trying to tie that in when you come back into Appendix B. So are those historic horse racing machines considered parimutuel wagering?
Yes, they are a type of parimutuel wagering because they are wagering on pools.
So the way I understand that, and that comes to my next question, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Is I was trying to understand the sale of parimutuel pools. So if I'm betting on if I understand that correct, and I'm looking for direction, if I'm betting on a horse, I'm betting in a pool of other people. And I buy a ticket. It talks about you get a ticket in exchange for that. And I'm wagering against all those other people, but when I'm at a historic horse racing machine, there's not a ticket I received, a wager I place, and I'm only playing against myself. So how does that jive?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, it is still a parimutuel pool. You may not see the other people who are in the pool with you because you're not all at the track at the same time. But funds are pooled in the same way it would be pooled at a live event.
So Mr.
Please,
Chairman,
please.
so I'm still confused. So if I go in, so I'm talking about a historic horse racing machine,
Mhm.
right? Are you saying at the same time I'm getting ready to pull that button, there is somebody else, someplace else in the world pulling their button at the same time on, walk me through that. I'm not understanding how that, still not understanding how that jives.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, I would be naive to say that I fully understand exactly how the back office works in that.
Okay.
However, that being said, there are other casino types of gaming where you not only have the individual win directly based upon as you put it on the pull, but there is a jackpot type of winning. And that, of course, is a pooled winning because you're not putting in that and getting that back.
Thank you, Mr.
Welcome. Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, I'm looking at that table 3. It's wagering activity and total amount of distribution of operator remitted wagering revenue. Does that relate to the online sports wagering, or which one does it relate to? Because if I was doing that wagering, running that, I'd be doing that because they, if I'm right, they netted about $314 million on that, paying the Department of Health and some into the general fund. Which one of those charts is that money coming from?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, Table 3 specifically is referring to online sports wagering.
And follow up, and that is correct that they on the online, they netted 314 million, which would be one of the highest payouts, which I think is that 90% payout that the operator gets. Is
Mr.
that
Chairman.
correct?
Mr. Chairman, that is the total amount that was reported as the total amount wagered by Wyoming residents on that are participating in online sports wagering. Yes. Of that, 10% is remitted to the state. And that is where you have the distribution in the Department of Health and the general fund. Now that 316 is also gross minus their deductions that they're allowed to take by statute. So that's why the distribution to the Gaming Commission was only $2.03 million in that period.
Anything else?
Yeah, so that looks like it's the most profitable for the operator to do the online sports wagering. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have their balance sheets, so I can't tell you which is going to be most profitable for them. But in terms of taxing, 10% is less than the 20% that we have on the sports gaming, and it is less than the 1.5% that currently exists on or it's more than the 1.5% that exists on historic racing. So it's in there. But if we were to compare just the two types of online sports versus skill-based gaming, yes, the tax rate is about half.
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Stith.
Mr. Chairman. So Karen, that $316 million shown as total wagering activity, that's the total activity, not the net income they're making, right?
Absolutely.
Because they're making maybe about 7% on it. And then you take the 7% times the 316, and then 10% of that becomes the tax revenue, which is about $2 million. Is that right?
Correct. That is the total wagering activity. And then you would distill it down, yes, to a net proceeds of which you would apply the tax.
Okay, Representative Larson.
Karen, Karen, over the years since we've had these conversations, I may be in error, but I've kind of been led to believe that the reason we've adopted simulcasting historic horse racing is so that we can ensure and stabilize live horse racing. And so that would be my first question. Is my understanding accurate on that?
Mr. Chairman, yes, and you cannot receive a simulcasting permit unless you have a live permit.
So Mr. Chairman.
Please.
So is there anything in the statute that denotes that that's the purpose or the reason for having simulcasting historic horse racing? And if so, then how much simulcasting and historic horse racing does it take to support a level of one race day?
Mr. Chairman, I can't point you to a sentence in the statute that says because of this, then that. But it is apparent that the historic horse racing supports live racing, absolutely. Because not only do you have to be a permittee of another form of a parimutuel license, you also have a minimum requirement of a number of race days, 16 days.
One follow-up.
Please.
Agreed, but I guess where I'm going with that is I don't see our race days increasing, but the historic horse racing simulcasting and as such has increased significantly. You would think one would spawn growth in the other. Is that a fair assumption? And is there a reason why that hasn't happened?
Mr. Chairman, I can't speculate on why we don't have more live racing. But I do believe, yes, that the two go hand in hand.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further questions for Karen? Further questions? Representative Zwanitzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to confirm when we're looking at skill-based amusement games, it stated that some of the states take a percentage, but there was also a state in there that said they just had a per terminal charge. But I think I heard you say that in your research, you weren't able to find any states that had that single charge. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Representative Swanitzer, that is correct. In the 2020 study, Virginia was recognized as having a per terminal fee. However, based upon the research that I've done, Virginia had a lot of litigation as it relates to skill-based gaming, and that was not implemented in that way. And I believe at this point, that this is still something that their legislature is grappling with.
Anything further? Okay, further questions for Karen? Further questions? Karen, since you've done this background research, I readily admit I don't understand horse racing. And so I'll ask you some questions. You can, if you know, thank you. And people here, when they have a chance to testify, might be able to set me straight on this. But the historic horse racing legislation was carried by Sue Wallace of Campbell County and John Schiffer of Johnson County. And what Senator Schiffer's intent was to revive horse breeding and horse racing in Wyoming. In fact, his father moved from New York to Wyoming specifically to establish horse breeding operations, and they shipped a lot of that into California. And in fact, at the Del Mar racetrack in California, there's a bust honoring John Schiffer's dad as essentially the father of the California horse racing industry. That's how robust the industry was at that time. So I'm fascinated to see here the number of live horse racing events has increased since this program began. Explain to me what the Wyoming bred program is. You said here that they did establish a preference for Wyoming bred horses for a race day, but other than that, is there any other incentive built into the programs for Wyoming bred horses as opposed to somebody bringing their horse in from somewhere else and competing for a purse? Do you know?
Mr. Chairman, based upon the information that I have, based in 1967, permittees were required to run at least one race per day, giving preference to Wyoming bred.
And that's the full extent of the
That
program.
was initially.
Okay,
And then the Breeders' Award Fund was established. And with that, in addition to your racing, and you now have payouts from the Breeders' Award to Wyoming breeders of stallions and other animals.
and the payout is based on what?
I would have to phone a friend.
Okay, all right. And then going to your appendix A, B, and C. I
Yes,
see
sir.
under appendix A, at the very bottom, you've got the Breeder Award Fund. And it looks like the only inflow of revenue to that is from simulcast and from permittee contributions for retainage on multiple or exotic wagers. So there's nothing from just total historic horse racing going into that Breeder Award Fund?
Mr. Chairman, no, nothing from the historic goes into the Breeder Fund. The only sourcing that it has is the source market fees as well as live racing.
Okay. And then appendix B and C shows nothing from these other two wagerings, online or skills, going into the Breeders' Award.
No, because these appendix B and appendix C, B refers to the skill-based amusement games and C refers to the online gaming, which are outside of traditional parimutuel wagering.
Okay, and then if you know, my understanding is if one of the three licensee is running a live horse race, their location that they have the machines in has to close for that day or just during that race. How does that work?
I would ask that the Gaming Commission give you the information on the current regulations and their rules of that.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Karen. Appreciate all your work. Representative Larson.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, a follow-up to your question on the Breeders' Cup, could you just help us understand what the criteria is to participate in the Breeders' Award? There's some nuances there that the horses have to be in, that they don't necessarily have to be from Wyoming, or the owners don't have to be from Wyoming. Help me understand what you do to qualify for that. And maybe we can have the Gaming Commission do that.
Mr.
if you
Chairman, I
don't
think
mind.
that would be best.
That'll be fine. So thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Well, Karen, thank you for a robust and concise walkthrough on a complicated regulatory tangle in history. Appreciate all your work.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, next up, we have from the Attorney General's office, Michael Kaler. Welcome, sir. And we have a memo that you was not part of the original packet, but was on our desk this morning from you as well. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, again, my name is Mike Kaler. I'm with the Attorney General's office and I'm the Gaming Commission's advising attorney. And I did there at Ms. Vaughn's request, a brief memo that you should have. Just a 4-page memo that goes through some of the common types of gambling found in Wyoming and some of the background on how they started. The memo touches on a few different areas where legalized gambling is found in Wyoming statute. First, it starts with Title VI, which are the criminal statutes, and that's where we define what is gambling. And then we also provide a list of roughly a dozen or 13 exceptions to the general gambling prohibition in Wyoming. Also talk about the online sports wagering statutes and how those came to be. And those are in Title IX. And then Title 11 contains our parimutuel wagering statutes, skill-based amusement game statutes, and then of course the kind of the general makeup of the commission, that I won't get into. And so, it kind of highlights, we have Title VI, we have Title IX, we have Title 11, and that kind of shows how we have, when we look at gambling in Wyoming, we have to know which statute to look to. and they're just in different places. So, again, Wyoming law under Title VI provides a list of exceptions that have been added over the years. Touch briefly on a few of them. The first one is the bona fide social relationship exception. It's not often talked about as compared to other gambling exceptions. However, the commission does see quite a bit of gambling that takes place under this exception. Some examples of that would be poker tournaments, basketball tournament brackets such as March Madness every year, Super Bowl squares, sports pools, and then other types of social gambling that takes place when you have a bona fide social relationship. We do not have a statutory definition as to what a bona fide social relationship is. Some other states have defined it. Some other states have had the opportunity to get a judicial definition from the courts when those cases get appealed, but we don't have that in Wyoming. And so, we see oftentimes that one does lead to a little bit of uncertainty for the public, for the Gaming Commission, and for prosecutors around the state over my years in the office. What one county may see as legal, another county may see as illegal. And so there is a little bit of inconsistency there as far as the understandings and the prosecutions in various counties. But again, it's something where the commission is seeing more types of gambling come up and gets quite a few questions about this exception. Generally, the commission looks at the various aspects of the type of gambling, and then they look at whether or not there is a genuine or a bona fide social relationship that exists. And so it's not always a black and white answer as to whether there's that relationship. And so, we'll continue probably to see additional types of gambling there.
Co-Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you. Mr. Kaler, has the commission or the director asked you to put together a draft or an outline or a rule and regulation to define or to put parameters around a bona fide social relationship?
Mr. Chairman, Co-Chairman Nicholas, as far as rule goes, I'd have to look back at the statutes. But I'm not, because that falls in Title VI, I'm not quite sure the commission's rulemaking authority quite reaches as far to define Title VI. What we typically do is we look to, there's a string of court cases out of Colorado, and the Colorado Court of Appeals has defined what they determine to be a bona fide social relationship. And so oftentimes that's what we look to. And the bona fide social relationship exception in Colorado, that comes from their liquor statutes, not their gambling statutes. And so from what I recall, if you have a liquor license, you can't allow illegal gambling, and then that's an exception to illegal gambling.
So follow up. So, Mike, then if we asked them or directed the commission to do so, and whether or not it was either through rule or through a proposed change to the criminal code or have something where in Title 9 or 11, either one, so that we can give you guidance and you can help us structure what would be reasonable or what exists out there. Would that be something that would be achievable?
Mr. Chairman, Co-Chairman Nicholas, yeah, certainly if, whether or not it's, it's a statutory definition, we could certainly come back and provide examples of what other states use. We could talk about what the Colorado Court of Appeals has decided, but that certainly we could look into that.
So, Mr. Co-Chair, so my question would be, I think would like you to have first run at it because you understand it and know what's out there and we don't. And so you could come back and give us an option of 2 or 3 types of possibilities. But the idea that we have an ongoing definition, or we can just get rid of it. I mean, whatever you would recommend would give us some options that we can do our homework on and then say, okay, this one makes the most sense.
Mr. Chairman, Co-Chairman Nicholas, sure, I'm happy to work with the Gaming Commission to put together some language and that would obviously come through them in future meetings.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm curious on bona fide social relationship, what they've done in Colorado. I mean, because you said you can run a March Madness bracket under that. Is there some logical, I mean, could it just be me and my 2,000 closest friends who all share a mutual interest in basketball and I'm taking a little bit for my trouble and putting the whole bracket together and it's just a bona fide social relationship? Where's the limit on that thing?
Mr. Chairman, the way that I've read the decisions down in Colorado, they've kind of given it a tougher look and said that the social relationship must exist independent of the gambling relationship. And so you can't just show up and have this social relationship because you're there to gamble. They look at kind of an independent social relationship. You know, say you have an office of 20 employees, you have that relationship, and then those people would maybe put together a basketball bracket.
I see. Representative Stith?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Kaler, thank you. You mentioned different outcomes in different counties from prosecutors. Has anyone actually been prosecuted for running Super Bowl squares or March Madness bracket or even a social poker game in any time in the recent past?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stith, those are all anecdotal in getting phone calls from various prosecutors around the state, just in random discussions that we've had in probably my 10, 12 years of representing the commission. I've come to learn that different county attorneys over the years have interpreted that that phrase bona fide social relationship differently. I have not seen an instance. Now, that's not to say that it hasn't happened because we don't see a lot of the lower level prosecutions, but I haven't seen where the courts have interpreted that in Wyoming.
Mr. Kaler, you were going through a presentation and we got off onto bona fide social relationship. I don't want to foreclose the balance of your presentation.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'll proceed. The second area, the gaming exceptions that I talked about in that memo, simulcasting and historic horse racing. So quick overview of that. In the early 2000s, the Parimutuel Commission at the time amended their rules to allow what they called instant racing terminals. After they operated for a couple of years in this state, the Cheyenne Police Department issued a cease and desist letter and ended up shutting down those games as the case worked its way through district court and up to the Supreme Court. And eventually in 2006, the Wyoming Supreme Court held that the commission lacked authority to authorize those games and that a statutory change was necessary for them to legally authorize those games. So that's where in 2013, as Ms. Vaughn had talked about, the legislature specifically authorized historic horse racing under the simulcasting part of the statutes. And the commission then amended their rules to allow historic horse racing. Then in 2015, generally things have been going smoothly, but after certain terminals have been approved and begin operating in the state, the commission requested an opinion analyzing historic horse racing and the various operations of the software. So the Attorney General reviewed that and based on the software in those terminals, determined that they did not comply because essentially the games had bonus rounds in them. And so how well you handicapped the horse racing on the historic horse racing terminals. Ultimately, the bonus round is what decided the outcome of that wager. And so the commission, upon receiving that opinion, shut down the terminals for a short time. And the operators brought in new games that they determined to be compliant through review and software review and things like that. And since that time, the historic horse racing terminals have generally been not an issue in Wyoming as far as the operation and the legality of them. You'll see in the memo where I talk about, provide a comparison of historic horse racing and skill-based amusement games. And I point out some of the difference in those respective laws with respect to the skill-based amusement games. And I think a little has been talked about. The statutes limit a few aspects, locations. They're limited to licensed liquor establishments, truck stops, smoke shops. Regarding number of terminals, there's a limit to 4 terminals per location. Wagers are limited to $3 per play, and jackpots are limited to $3,000 per jackpot. And those are for the skill-based amusement games. For comparison, historic horse racing does not have those same limitations. The types of locations are unrestricted. Although they have to meet certain requirements for an off-track betting location and simulcasting. They aren't limited to certain types of locations. And there is no statutory limit on the number of terminals as has been talked about. Further, maximum wagers and maximum jackpots are not limited under the statutes, and there's probably a reason why that at least the jackpots aren't limited, because that's pooled wagering, and so it's challenging to limit the number or the amount of jackpots with respect to pooled wagering. One last difference is that parimutuel wagering and historic horse racing require a person to be 18 years of age or older, as compared to skill games, which require someone to be 21 and older.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you explain to me why we have that different age on the skill base? I understand a lot of those are located in bars and you have to be 21 to get into bars, but some of them are not located in those type of facilities. So just maybe an explanation to the age difference. And also if we get into other types of internet gambling, whatever, how we distinguish the legal age.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Zwanitzer, I do not have a strong background on the legislative intent as to why the difference. I know that, for a long time, it was parimutuel wagering. You could do it at 18 years old. And then, but that was just betting on live racing. And then you have the simulcast racing come into play. And then when historic horse racing was added, it's characterized as simulcast wagering. I think they just went ahead, the legislature just went ahead and kept that as 18 and over. I know that there's been talk over the years about it, but I don't have an idea why.
Follow up. Representative, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To help answer that question, as the sponsor of the online sports wagering and the skill-based amusement games legislation, it was really the skill-based amusement games came in and we put them in the liquor licensed locations originally. Then it was followed to be in the smoke shops and other locations. And if you have to be 21 to be in the liquor licensed locations, you would need to be 21 to play the games. That's how we established that. And then we followed it with the online sports wagering just to keep it at a more mature level. Hopefully by 21, folks are mature enough to not spend too much of their paycheck each month on wagering activities. And to the question about how on the online wagering, how they make sure that they're verified as 21 or older, there's a Know Your Customer program that basically verifies who you are when you sign up to get the account, and then it continuously monitors to make sure there's probably a way a young person could steal their parents' driver's license and get it inputted and set up an account and things like that. But it is a very robust program used nationally to make sure that these players are of age as indicated by the state where they're legalized. So I think it's a pretty good program that works.
Thank you, Representative. Anything else for Mr. Kaler before he continues? Oh, okay, please, Mr. Kaler.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And moving on to the skill-based amusement games and how they came into Wyoming. Memo talks about how they first started operating around 2017 from looking back at this. Operators at the time had believed that the games were legal under one of the exceptions then existing at the time. That was the contest of skill, speed, strength, or endurance exception to gambling. Again, our office was asked for an opinion as to whether or not they were legal under that exception or under any other exception in Wyoming law. In 2018, our office issued a formal opinion and considered these to be illegal gambling devices under the law. And then in 2020, so that was at the later part of 2018, maybe December of 2018. And then just over a year later, the legislature in 2020 grandfathered in about 400 games and legalized those on a trial basis with a sunset provision. And then we went for about a year. And then in 2021, the legislature lifted that sunset provision and made those games permanent, and then limited newer games, or I guess future games, to the licensed liquor establishments and the truck stops and the smoke shops. They also grandfathered in the games that had already been in existence that didn't quite meet those qualifications. Since that time, the skill game laws have not caused many legal issues, and they've been running smoothly. And I think, skill-based amusement games, as distinguished between online sports wagering or historic horse racing, I think I point out in the memo, the historic or the skill-based amusement games came into the state prior to legislation that specifically contemplated those games. And so the commission had a little bit of a challenge where the games were already in operation and then the statutes came along. And so it took about a year or two, but I think we were able to kind of work through the bumps in the road. And now they seem to be operating smoothly and not a whole lot of issues with respect to legal problems for those games. Finally, move on to online sports wagering, which the legislature authorized in 2021. Those statutes were very comprehensive. They were patterned after other states' laws. They required that the commission review other states' laws, other states' rules, and promulgate a set of rules similar to what other states did. And so that allowed the commission to fairly quickly get a set of rules in place, I believe by September of 2021, so that the industry could get up and going and they could license operators. And so they did that. And so by adopting those sports wagering rules prior to operators coming in and offering sports wagering, and by adopting statutes and rules similar to other jurisdictions, I'd say relatively few legal issues have come up with those types of wagering, and things have been running generally fairly smoothly. So with that, I've covered pretty much what I provided in the memo, and be happy to answer any questions.
Representative Larson.
Thank you. Could you just remind me, or maybe Representative Walters could remind me how we define what a smoke shop is? I'm just trying to remember what those.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, I believe it's, and I can be corrected if I'm wrong, but I believe it's 50% of their gross sales are attributed to tobacco products. I'd have to look back at that.
Okay, thank
Follow
you.
up?
I can.
Okay, other questions from Mr. Kaler? You have Representative Nicholas, co-chair.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Mike, if you would you provide us or the LSO with a copy of those two AG opinions? Those will have some good background information for us just to get better understanding of the history that you just talked about.
Mr. Chair, Co-Chair Nicholas, I'd be happy to. The one was a formal opinion. I believe privilege was released on the other one, so that shouldn't be an issue.
Anything further from Mr. Kaler from the committee? As familiar as you are with the statute, do you have enough to explain to me the Breeders' Award, the Breeders' Cup, how that functions? Who's eligible, who's not?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Laramendi is probably a better person to give you kind of the nuts and bolts of it, but generally speaking, the Breeders' Award Fund is funded by both the parimutuel wagering on the live events and also on the simulcast and the historic horse racing money that comes in. They take a percentage of that goes into the Breeders' Award Fund. The commission then monitors through a set of rules that it's established, the requirements to be a Wyoming bred horse. The horse has to be born in the state, has to pretty much spend all of its time in the state. It can only leave the state for limited reasons, for racing or for medical or for breeding purposes, things like that. And as long as that horse is registered as a Wyoming bred horse, it's eligible to participate in the breeders or the Wyoming bred races. And they receive points for depending upon how they do in those Wyoming bred races. And then at the end of the year, the commission tallies those points and distributes that money accordingly.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Anything else from Mr. Kaler? All right, thank you. Greatly appreciate your work. So next up, we have Charlie Moore. Welcome. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, committee members. My name is Charles Moore, the director of the Wyoming Gaming Commission. With me today, joining on Zoom, I have Vice President Cactus Cavello. We also have President Broussard, I believe, on there as well. And then I have Nick Laramendi with me sitting here, and then our operations manager also in the room, Mike Steinberg. Again, thank you for having us here today. This item is the statewide study, I believe. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Nick to update you on where we're at with the study. That's your pleasure.
Thank you. Mr. Laramendi, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I may, would you like me to touch on a couple of the questions that were previously asked and clarify a couple of those real quick?
Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, Representative Larson, to your point about the HR or the HHR pools and how they're pooled together, they don't go across nation. They're all in the state, and each operator's pools are independent of each other. So if you go into a location owned by one operator and you play a specific game, all of their locations that share that game, we call them math models. That's the back end system that it contributes to. Everybody playing that game or that math model, that money is being contributed to those pools. So they're not shared across state lines. And then, like I said, each operators are independent of each other. Does that answer that question? And then,
Mr. Chairman,
Please.
Mr. Chairman, while we're on that subject, just for clarity, when you say each game, so there a particular operator may have a variety of games or game titles, I guess how I would look at it. And so it might be Wheel of Fortune or Jeopardy would be the game title. And so a Wheel of Fortune or game in Gillette would be pooled with a Wheel of Fortune game in Casper and a Wheel of Fortune game in Rock Springs. And all of those players would then be pooled for the outcome. Is that a good generic description?
Mr. Chair, Representative Walters, that's correct. And so the themes themselves, which is the Wheel of Fortune or the dancing dinosaurs, there's a lot of different themes that operate on one math model. So you could be playing Wheel of Fortune, and then somebody just a couple of terminals down could be playing a different theme. But if they're associated to the same math model, it's all going to that one pool. And actually on our website, we have a catalog of all of the themes and the associated math model with that theme. So you could actually go through and sort that out by math model or theme, and you'll see which themes operate on which math models. And then those are all tied together. As far as I know there's been mention about limiting, the skill-based amusement games by statute. It's a $3 max bet or a $3,000 payout. With parimutuel pools, really the only way to limit a max payout would be to limit the wagering. So if you wanted to set a max jackpot, for example, on an HHR terminal at $100,000, once people contribute to that pool and it builds to 100,000, the only way to stop it is to stop people from playing it, which in turn doesn't allow anybody to win it. So then it just sits there. So that gets very difficult with parimutuel pools. The only way to limit it is really to not play it.
Co-Chair Nicholas.
Thank you. Could you just follow up, go a little deeper? I mean, how well used is the HHR pools through the various terminals? How much is churned through there as opposed to others? I mean, is it popular amongst the avid users, or what's the market for it?
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure I understand your question correctly. The HHR terminals are very popular. All of them work on parimutuel wagering. So it's all pooled money. So when you go in, the operator gets a commission rate. That's a set amount. So when you go into a simulcast facility or an OTB location, really the house, you hear that a lot in gaming, that the house always wins. In parimutuel wagering, there really isn't a house. Technically, they don't really care if you win or lose because they've already got their piece of when you put $1 in, they get a percentage of that dollar right off the top. The rest of it goes into the pool. So they've already kind of made their money. So, I mean, obviously they want you to win, so you keep coming back. But if you don't win, they've already made their money, and that money just sits in the pools. Does that answer your question?
Well, it does for now. Go ahead.
Okay.
So I'd like to follow up on Representative Larson's question when he asked, the hypothetical was that this person's pushing the button at the same time somebody else is, but the parimutuel pool also goes across time, right? I mean, it's not just everybody betting right now. I assume it's some kind of rolling pool over time, so that as players come and go, the pool is still there.
Mr. Chair, that is correct. That pool will continue to build and go down and build and go down, depending on the players that are playing the pool and their picks against the races that terminal drew. So if ultimately, really to win like one of the big jackpots that you see, that's depending on which operator or which manufacturer, the easiest one, it's 3 race cards and you're pulling a win, play, show, a trifecta on 3 race cards. So if by chance you pick a win, play, show, win, play, show, win, play, show, which would be a superfecta, that would be the jackpot, and you would actually win the jackpot. That's how that works.
Okay.
Charlie.
Mr. Moore.
Yes, thank you. To follow up on that, just briefly, historic racing is built on a parimutuel model. It is a parimutuel wager. It's an exotic wager, and we define exotic wagers in our statutes, which is multiple types of multiple wagers on the outcomes. And it's very similar to like a pick 6 you'll see, or a pick 4 that grows through time throughout a day of racing. It's very similar to that. So it's following the traditional model and enhancing it through the electronical means.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Laramendi you hadn't gotten to your presentation yet. You're following up on some other points. Are you still on that?
Mr. Chair, I've got one more. It was actually one of your questions about the Breeders' Award Fund being supplemented by HHR. So by definition, simulcasting is HHR. So 10% of that profit or taxable income from HHR goes into the Breeders' Award Program. That's actually how the Breeders' Award Program has grown so much, because the majority of the parimutuel wagering is done on historic horse racing.
So you said simulcasting is actually HHR is simulcasting, right?
It is
Okay.
by statute. It is. So it's live simulcasting, sitting down at a table with a program, watching the Kentucky Derby from one of the OTB facilities, and also playing one of the terminals. Under Wyoming state law, those are both simulcasting.
But nothing,
One's live simulcasting, one's historic.
okay, but nothing from, well, this Appendix A then, I guess I'm not following, because Appendix A has the first top line of it is total wagers. I assume that's total wagers from historic horse racing. You'll have to take a look at it later.
On table 1,
Appendix A, page 5 of Karen's memo. Do you have them?
yes, I do. Mr. Chair, so the simulcast source fee up to 10%, that does include HHR and live simulcasting from the operators.
So this is a subset of the above, which is total wagers.
Correct.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, if
Oh,
you.
Representative
excuse me.
Larson. I'm sorry, Representative Larson.
Thank you. So would you help me understand on the Breeders' Cup Award Fund? How do we administer the fund? What you have revenue coming into it? Do we use just I mean, do we set how much of that award we can use, or do we zero it out every year? Do we try and, am I making sense on that question? I'm trying to understand that.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, thank you. The Breeders' Award Fund, first and foremost, we're leading the nation as far as paybacks. The fund is doing exactly what it was intended to do. Representative Wallace and Senator Schiffer, their intentions, and to bring more horses, more breeders, more owners to the state, administrating of it. It is zero balanced, and we pay that out after the first of the year. For instance, we are in the process of completing the payouts from the 23 wagering activity. We had over 7.8 million, I believe it was, that we've distributed. The formula is to the owners of the horse, to the breeder of the horse, and then the stallion owner of the horse. It's a percentage of that. Horses are awarded points every time they participate. If you win a race, a Wyoming bred race, or if you win a race in your Wyoming bred, if it's a 10-horse field, you're allowed 10 points. If you run second, you would get 9 points, so on and so forth. And then at the end of the year, those points are divided into the money, and that's how we pay that out.
Representative follow-up.
If I may. So with the increase revenue coming into that Breeders' Cup Fund and no increase in race days, has there been any contemplation about maybe setting a cap on the amount of that Breeders' Cup and take the rest to establish a corpus to generate revenue off investment to then supplement that in the future? Am I like we do on other such funds?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, there has been some discussion of looking at that. But when we talk to the industry, obviously they want that distributed, and you understand that. But also too, I somewhat disagree on the increased race days. We're running 54 days of racing this year between 3 operators in 3 locations across the state. Some of that is overlapping race dates. We start in 15 days or something like that, May 25th, and we run up into end of September. So we're kind of caught there as far as race dates as well, and purses are going up.
Follow up, please. Representative
Mr. Chairman,
Larson,
point taken on the race days. Thank you.
Representative Stith, and then Representative Co-Chair Nicholas.
Mr. Chairman, Director Moore, you mentioned the Breeders' Cup paying out about $7.8 million. How many individuals or organizations receive that money approximately?
We'd have to look at that. I know, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, Representative Stith, it's significant. We have several hundred people that are receiving the money. The top awardee is well over, just over 300,000 this year they received for their participation. And I think Mr. Laramendi's maybe trying to get the exact number. We have over 3,000 horses that are enrolled in the program. Of that, I believe we have 700 and some brood mares, which are the mothers of the horses that are in the state. And then we have a very strict program and rules and regulations that require those horses to be in the state. They can't move out of the state or within the state without notifying the commission. We are currently several times a year, we have inspectors that are at those farms inspecting, making sure those horses are there. And then they're verifying when their registration, that those foals were actually born in the state of Wyoming. And we're looking at that, auditing that whole program.
So I guess Mr. Laramendi can look it up, but a follow-up memo, number of horses over time, it's a stunning number of increase in the races from 0 to 54, the number of Wyoming bred horses over time, the number of breeders and so forth over time. I'd like to get a handle on that as well. And so then tell me, so if somebody's got a horse and it's a fast horse, it's a good horse, that are they able to take it out of state to enter it into some, large race at some famous track or some famous race? They're able to do that?
Mr. Chairman, yes, they are allowed to go out and race and participate. Now, they do not get points necessarily for that participation. The participation points are here in the state, but yes, they can take that horse out.
And so then just another follow-up. What about the purse for each race? None of that comes out of the Breeders' Award. How are the purses put together?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the question. No, you're absolutely correct. None of the money that comes out of the Breeders' Award program, that is distributed to the owners, to the breeders, and so on. The purse money is derived from the takeout at the racetracks, and the takeout is that percentage that's allowed in statute to take out, and then they pay their bills, they pay their purses, and we're seeing a significant rise in purses now. We've seen a significant rise in purses at all three of our racetracks over the last 2 to 3 years. And again, a big bump is expected, and we're seeing soon to come with the 2024 season.
So the bigger the purse, the bigger the race, the more you attract both in-state and out-of-state horses then. Okay, so Mr. Laramendi is going to get to the study, but I looked through the study. I didn't see, and maybe it's implicit in there. I mean, how many more horses, how many more horse breeders, how many more big races might we have in Wyoming as the purse builds and as the Breeders' Award build? Do we know what our potential expansion is there, or is that one of the purposes of the study?
Mr. Chairman, again, thank you. As everything evolves, everything increases, and you're absolutely right. Higher purses is bringing more horses. I know that the tracks currently are expecting an overabundance of horses this year, which is nice to see. You can always use more when you have a program. You'd like to have, the biggest base possible to put your race cards together. We're going to see with the increase in purses last year, we set several records in record-breaking races that we offered. First-time goals that we've never seen in the state of Wyoming. The neat part about it is we had races in Evanston last summer, well over $200,000 purses for one race. And we had Wyoming bred horses that were competing. That's the best part of this whole thing. Senator Schiffer's brother happened to be, who's on the commission. Commissioner Schiffer happened to be in California this year for the Breeders' Cup. And he had people there at at Del Mar, that were coming up to him and saying, hey, we hear this program is phenomenal. Your racetracks are improving. Things are happening in the state of Wyoming. How do we participate? How do we come to Wyoming with our horses? How do we do that? Those are the things that really inspire us in the office and see these increases.
And Mr. Moore, so are there races that are just Wyoming bred horses in that race, or is it always a mixture of both in-state and out-of-state horses in every race?
Mr. Chairman, it can be all the above. Yes, we have races that are restricted to just Wyoming bred participants. We have races that are open to all participants. A lot of that depends on the volume and the types of horses you have at the racetrack, but also we're offering at every racetrack, we have what we call futurities, which are for 2-year-olds, but we also have, and that's for all 2-year-olds, could be potentially in there. But then we also have a restricted race, which would be for 2-year-old Wyoming bred horses. And then it goes so on the same to 3-year-olds and on up older horses. And then there's just what we call overnight races, which are a race that you can enter in and it's in the condition book. You can point to it. They're restricted to Wyoming breds. If a Wyoming bred race does not fill by 10, 11 o'clock in the morning, they can open those races up to all horses to participate if they want to.
Thank you. Anything committee co-chairman Nicholas?
And so I'm kind of making a list here because obviously we're here to learn as much as we possibly can about what you're doing over the course of this interim. And this is just step one. And I have not spent the time to go through your website, particularly on the Breeders' Cup, but let's just use that as an example. I think we want to know everything you do with the Breeders' Cup. We want to know, you said that it's working and that we're leading in paybacks. How many horses are we talking about? Who are the owners? What's your payout? You've got the breeders, you've got the mares, you've got the stallions. We want to know what the payouts is for each of those and who those recipients are. If we're growing actual folks who are raising those horses in Wyoming, how many folks are there? How big of properties do they own? How big of an impact are they doing? And if it's 25, is it 100? And where are they located? I mean, all this information, and as it's growing, and it's probably data we're going to need over time, and how it's evolving, because it sounds to me as you're talking and as I'm listening today, it's evolving every year and it's growing every year. And so then we need to probably start thinking about, well, what's the forecast for future growth? What's that predicated on? And if you've got 44 days of racing, but you're running at 3 different tracks, then you're running a lot more races, and depending on how much you overlap. And so all of these things are data that we need to understand in order for us to do what we think is a comprehensive evaluation of each of those programs. And but just so and on your paybacks on the Breeders' Cup. Once again, we need to know more of a detailed understanding of how you get there and how much money is being circulated, because all we see is it's going from 2 million to 5 million to 6 billion and now 7.8 million. And we're going, well, wait a minute. When's that going to end and who's the beneficiaries? And is somebody making a lot of money out of this versus some that don't? So that we're limiting it to the high-end horse racers that are raising off of the best studs and that type of thing. And so all that's thing we need to understand and be educated on. And the same on each component, as we're talking about it, skill-based versus online, all these different things, a menagerie of different information that we're gonna basically need to start putting together a data book so we can have as much information as we can and start accumulating that information over the next 2 or 3 months so that as we work our way down this path, we'll do something that reasonably intelligent and educated. So.
You had me till that last part.
Yeah, and so we're making notes on this. We'll follow up with it, but I'd like you to do the same thing and just think about the things that you can provide us. And this goes for all of the folks here, to help us understand this. Okay.
And I'm with him. If what we see is a flourishing of a number of operators across the state, different locales, and a flourishing in the number of horses, that's of interest. If it's a half a dozen operations that are walking away with 90% of the money and we're really not creating a more broad-based horse industry, I'd like to know that as well.
Mr. Chairman, if I may briefly.
Please.
Yeah, thank you. And to kind of respond to co-chairs questions or statements. Everything is in our annual report that we did provide for you, but I also understand it's a lot to go through. So we'll delineate that for you. We will get that to you over the next few weeks. It's also all posted on our website. If you want to look there and go through the website prior to us getting that to you. And the Breeders' Award Program and all the programs that we're administering, this is going to take some time, as you are all understand. And we look forward to bringing this information to you and helping to educate you on what we do. But maybe more importantly, if it's appropriate, I would like to invite each and every one of you, if you have a day and you would like, and you're in Casper, again, I would love to spend some time and sit down and just show you some of the tools that we use in our oversight, but also introduce you to some of the people. Brandy Koltiska is our lead person with the Breeders' Award Program, and introduce you to those folks. And we'll have Brandy at our next meeting as well, too.
Well, and just let me, Mr.
Please,
Co-Chair,
Mr.
break that
Co-Chair.
down a little bit. I'm looking at your annual report. You've got 832 accredited Wyoming red mares and stallions. That's just the tip of the iceberg. So we want to know who owns them, how old they are, what races they're running, how often they're running, and what the payouts are. And all of those components of the 40-40-20. So we see the big picture of all those things. So, and we will, some of us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a couple of questions across the information they provided. My first one would be if Charlie, perhaps if you, Mr. Moore, if you wouldn't mind, when in your document there, the regulatory overview, it talks about the public purpose for which gaming was authorized. What is that public purpose?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, I believe you're speaking of the 2020 report.
I am.
And thank you. I did draft that and did write that report and provided it to you all. The public purpose, our mission statement covers the public purpose, protecting of the wagering public and the health, safety, and welfare of all participants. That's our general mission statement. And to make sure we're distributing the funds appropriately.
So, Mr. Chairman, I agree that that's how you enforce the gaming, but what's the purpose for which gaming was authorized?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, several levels there, I believe, because of the types of wagering that we have currently now. But I think that the public purpose with parimutuel wagering is, and I think maybe the question is, what was the purpose of historic racing? Is that what you're looking for?
Representative Larkin.
Mr. Chairman, it talks about the policy and maximizing control of social harms and such about. And so it says the standards of the facility and operational quality should ensure that gaming operations fulfill the public purpose for which gaming was authorized. And so as the director of the gaming commission, I think it's important that we understand what the purpose of each of those gambling things are, and I'm just trying to get a feel for what the public purpose is and your interpretation of what that is. And so then, as you talked about on racing, this is how you enforce that, but I'm just trying to understand what you believe the public purpose is.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Kinski, Representative Larson. The public purpose is to ensure the integrity of these events. That is the primary purpose, and the protection of the wagering public as well is part of that. And as I stated, then our mission statement goes on and talks about the health, safety, and welfare. If you'd like me to, in a follow-up memo, I can come back and delineate that down through all the different programs, if that would be helpful.
You would, Mr. Chairman, Paul?
Yes, please.
So then my next question, could you help me understand, particularly as we see we passed legislation that allowed historic horse racing machines to then be located outside the operator's facility, and we see them located around communities. Could you just help me understand how that process works? Do you authorize the expansion of additional machines or new machines into a new location? And I'm trying to and I know that there's a mileage, and so staying within the parameters, within the mileage and stuff, but within the confines, the geographical confines, how then do you determine and what do you consider when you approve new machines?
Mr. Chair,
additional
Representative
machines.
Larson, for an OTB location, there's an application process. So when the operator submits an application, they delineate the location, they give us floor plan layouts, how many terminals are going to be there, what types of terminals are going to be there. And with that, they also have to provide us with a resolution from the county that it's going into, showing that the county has reviewed that and the county has approved that offsite location within their county. And then we compile all that, we go through the application, we ensure that, they're in good standing. We look over the site security plans, their plan of operations. We ensure that it is going to be operated within, municipal ordinance, if there's hours of operations, things like that. And then that goes before the commission for approval.
Thank you. And one more.
Please follow up.
So, and then my last question that I have for you was, as I looked through your RFP on this study, I didn't see any requests in there to study the social impacts associated with the growth of gaming. And I was curious as to why that was not considered.
Mr. Chair, I'm reading through that real quick.
And I'm in section 6 scope of the project. Maybe it's someplace else, but Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair, Representative Larson, I believe that is in somewhere else, and I'll search through that because that was, if you'd like me to real quickly, because this was kind of what the gist of this was for. So the commission had put out an RFP for a study on its own. And then the budget footnote came out, which added to the scope of the project that we had already put out there. So we had worked with procurement. We pulled that old RFP. We've amended that and it was reposted. It has since closed. It closed actually on the 1st of this month. We did receive some proposals back from that. But I will look through this real quick because that was part of this, was to analyze the social impacts of gaming and the expansion of gaming within communities. I just got to remember where that was at.
So
And that's
kind of-
something that we can definitely address as we go through
Yeah,
the,
so kind of recap where we were, originally you were gonna walk us through the RFP, but then you wanted to follow up on some things that had come up.
correct.
So let's go ahead and take our scheduled 15-minute break, and when we come back, then you can walk us through the RFP.
Okay, sounds good.
Let's
Thank
do
you.
that. So I have 7 after. We'll take a 15-minute break and be back here and promptly in 15 minutes. Set my timer. All right, we're back. And Mr. Laramendi, take us through the RFP. You highlighted the fact that you had issued one and then got the legislative footnote and modified it, and now you've received some proposals, but take us through the RFP if you could, please.
Mr. Chair, thank you. So continuing on with the RFP, the commission did submit an RFP. The budget footnote kind of changed the scope of what was required. So we worked with procurement. We revised the previous RFP to add the amendments into it from the budget footnote, and that was published about 30 days ago. It closed on May 1st, and we have received 3 proposals back. I'll just quickly go through kind of the scope of the project, what was requested in the RFP. The scope of the project was that the report shall analyze the current framework and the responsibilities of the Gaming Commission, including the structure of the Gaming Commission as an entity within state government. The report shall also analyze the regulation of all wagering activities, including live horse racing, historical horse racing, and OTB operations, its ability to grow, the potential effects on HISA.
Are you on a particular page?
Yes, sir. It's page 12 of 21 on the RFP.
Thank you.
Simulcasting and further regulatory support to the industry. The report shall also analyze the regulation and all wagering activities for skill-based amusement games, sports wagering, both land and online, as well as charitable gaming. The report shall also analyze the economic benefits to the state of Wyoming, including increased tourism and tax revenue associated with the expansion of gaming activities in all of the above areas. In addition, the report shall analyze if growth is sustainable and a viable option, while considering the potential cannibalization of other currently viable and economically feasible entities. The report shall analyze the potential economic cost of regulation to the state of Wyoming of further growth and expansion in these areas. And those areas would include the skill-based amusement games, online sports wagering, charitable gaming, live horse racing, and OTB operations as well. The report shall examine the current regulatory framework for gaming in the state and propose any necessary amendments or additions to ensure responsible and fair gaming practices. Part of this one would also be the analyzing our current rules and regulations, Gaming Commission rules and regulations, as well as Wyoming state statutes to include Title 6, 11, and 9 for the online sports wagering, parimutuel and skill-based amusement games, and then Title 6 for the general gambling statutes. The report shall examine the current regulatory. The report shall examine the commission's oversight capacity, the transparency and efficiency of commission monitoring and reporting on licensees and horse track safety. The report shall consider the number and growth of wagering locations and activity, as well as the existing infrastructure to determine its readiness to support new gaming establishments. Based on industry standards, the report shall investigate gaps in Wyoming law that affect or may affect the security, integrity, or fairness of gaming activities, such as statutes identifying key personnel who should be required to obtain a gaming license or permit, grounds for denying an application for a license or permit, and processes and procedures to address noncompliance with gaming laws and regulations, such as issuance of notice of violations and closure orders. That is really the main scope of the project. I mean, if there's anything else that you all would like to see, we can definitely note that as we do our selection process and discuss that as well.
Representative Stitt.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Laramendi, thank you. So if we made a mistake and forgot to put in, say, examining the social costs of gaming, is there a way to shoehorn that into this yet, or are we too late?
Mr. Chair, Representative Stitt, I don't believe we're too late. I believe that as we go through that selection process and we review the proposals to us, we can work that in, and it's not gonna change much. The brief overview that I've had of the 3 proposals actually already looked to that as part of the overall study as well.
Any further comments or questions from the committee? Comments or questions from the committee? Co-Chair Nicholas.
Thank you. Just to follow up on that, obviously this part of the proposal that you just read came out April 1st. Then tell us what your plan is, or what the practical way is to incorporate in what the legislature proposed in terms of working with this committee in putting together your RFP and or response that comes out.
Mr. Chair, Co-Chair Nicholas, I think in my mind, the best way to move forward would be if we could get somebody from this committee to sit on the selection committee, along with two of our commissioners. We have a commission meeting coming up in a couple of days where we're going to try to get two people to put together a board to review the three proposals. And then we can go through those proposals as a group and make the selection for which one to go with, and then get the work started just as soon as possible. I think a lot of the stuff that's in this study will really lay a good, solid groundwork for where this committee also wants to go with reviewing gaming as a whole.
And when's the anticipated completion of the study as it proceeds? I mean, will you see a rough draft and then say, no, you need to go here, do there? Do you follow it as it's being crafted?
Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, so the anticipated award date is the 1st of next month.
Right.
And then after that, whoever it's awarded to would work directly with our office, and we would be kind of working that through as quickly as possible. Some of the stuff that I've seen, it says 450 to 500 hours. So depending on how much they want to work, I guess that would all depend on the length of time until we get a completed report.
So do you have a proposed completion date that you'll present to you during your interviews, I presume?
Mr. Chair, that
Would it be, are you going to shoot for August, September, October?
it would be roughly the 1st of September, about 90 days.
So they'll be busy. Okay, thank you.
Anything further? Representative?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay? All right. So on 1.3, you're talking about your regulatory study, part of this study. My question is, Mr. Chairman, the overall timeline or chronology from start to implementation, and regulation after setup. Is that part of that too?
Mr. Chair, Representative Henderson, which page?
On the one you were just reading, 12 of 21, up there at 1.3, you're looking at regulation and wagering activities, but the regulation piece of it include a study of, the timeline. For example, when they set up the various types of gaming, or in various locations, and then the commission over time has responded with certain regulations or rules. And so what I'm asking is, have we got it in the right sequence? In our community, we had a pretty short notice on an activity that was well intended, but that was all of a sudden in terms of involving the community. And I'm asking, is this study going to look at that in terms of your perspective as a regulatory entity for the state, when we have these activities go and they sort from the application, and then how much time, and then the design and so on. I mean, I don't want to get micromanaged about it, but I want to know what to expect. I think people around the state would like to know that too. Wouldn't you agree?
Mr. Chair, I believe it would. Yes, I think part of this proposal, and when they do that study, in fact, in some of the responses that we've got, they're going to actually physically come to our office and meet with our staff, and they're going to go through our processes and procedures of how this looks. And they're going to analyze our processes to see if there's things that we can do better, or if there's things that we need to shift to better facilitate that across the state.
Thank you.
Representative Larson?
So
if you wouldn't mind helping me, because I think in my mind, I'm not sure that we have our policy in place that gives direction to what the study would need to include. And by that, I mean, you go in there and you talk about expansion before you start cannibalizing and, and all of that stuff as if there's this market driven, the decisions will be based upon what the market is. But I think that there's also a consideration on what we perhaps as a state feel is appropriate gaming in the state. Do we want to be able to have it opened up like our neighbors to the north of Montana, where there's a gaming's pretty common, and we have not made a policy decision on that type of expansion. What type of restrictions do we want to place on that? And so would this study then help us make, I'm just wondering if the cart's in front of the horse, or if this, from your perspective, if this helps us to make those determinations. I hope I'm asking a reasonable question there.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Representative Larson, I believe it would. I think this study would really lay some foundation and get a big picture overall of where it goes. And then as policymakers, you all can take that study and see where there's room for growth or where there's a need for restriction or changes or whatever else. That's how I envision it. Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Moore.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Larson, to follow up on that as well, that's why we initially started this study even before the footnote and the budgetary. We're looking for that guidance and trying to get that information so we can look at saturation, so we can look at, the different potentials that are out there in the state. And that was kind of the original intent of this. And the study, I believe in my mind will be very helpful to you all to make those policy decisions. And in not speaking totally for the commission probably, but for the majority of the commissioners, I think there is a concern. What does Wyoming look like in the future? And we're hoping that with this study, with the additional information I'm providing to you all, and we will over the next several months, we can sit down and craft the future of gaming in the Cowboy State. It's imperative that we have that guidance from you all.
Follow on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And then on your 1.6, where it talks about in section 6, where it talks about to examine the current regulatory framework, would that include our current structure of the gaming commission versus perhaps the structure of gaming commissions in other states and how those are selected and the criteria? Will that be included in this?
Chairman Kinski, Representative Larson. So the structure of the commission as an entity in state government would be covered under 1.1. And then 1.6 is really examining the rules and regulations and statutes.
Okay, anything else? Any other follow-up from the committee on the RFP? Okay, we have some industry folks and public that are anxious to testify. Charlie, did you have a brief wrap up or?
I think we've covered it all. I do have President Broussard online here and Vice President Covello. If it's appropriate, I think they may have something that they would like to say just briefly.
Please, gentlemen.
Yeah, this is President Broussard. I'd like to quote Co-Chair Nicholas and say no, thank you.
Okay. The Vice President the same or?
Mr. Chairman, members of the JAC, I would like to have a few comments if you don't mind. I believe that this
Please.
study will give us and you a better chance to look at where we need to go in the future. And I think that's what's really needed. There's a lot of people
within my district here that wonder what's going to happen with gaming. We got our first taste of it with skill games, and now we've got an OTB. There's a lot of people want to know how big does the state of Wyoming want this to be? Do we want large gaming facilities? Do we want to limit them? And I certainly have some ideas about that, and I'm sure you all do. But I think this study will help us get to the bottom of it, working together. Hopefully, we'll have a better idea where the future of gaming lies in the state, and we'll be able then to do a better job of helping regulate that for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Larson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Director Moore, without this study, you've got a number of rule changes coming up, I believe. Help me understand, are those rule changes something that you want to do before you get this study back? Will there be some conflicts between the rule changes and what we may do in the future, or should we call time out on that until we get this study back and make some policy choices?
All good questions, Mr. Moore.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Larson, again, thank you. Yes, we do have quite a few rules, and we have quite a bit of rule changes out there. Specifically, what we have coming up in Chapter 10, which is our simulcasting statutes. We've talked about defining race dates. We've talked about them, and primarily this is all with the historic horse racing and the horse racing side. So the rules are coming out to discuss and get the discussion going. We should have probably done this sooner, but I think that we, as a commission, the commissioners need to have the discussion, hear some of this, hear some of the ideas from the industry, get that open dialogue going in the near future, starting as soon as this week, the end of this week with our meeting. And hopefully that some of that information will flow to you folks, and you'll be able to hear it and understand where some of the industry would like to see this go. So I think it's all helpful. The rules that we're talking about, the Chapter 10, I think we need to wait before I would see that those wouldn't come to fruition till probably late fall. It takes that long anyway in the process to get enough public comment in and hear about it. And then the study is going to be a piece of that. Yes.
Follow up, Representative Larson.
So am I hearing you correctly in saying that you won't adopt any new rules until we have the study back and have had a chance to consider it?
Mr. Chairman, again, good question. That would be up to the commissioners to make that determination, obviously, but I would not see that happening until after the study, because the commissioners want to have as much information as possible too. This is an important thing. That's why we started this process even before the legislative footnote was to help us, guide us.
Mr. Moore, I'll join in with Representative Larson. I was concerned when I saw it. If it's just some administrative change, that's one thing, but you've got some fairly substantial policy changes in there. The legislature didn't gavel in until next year. I mean, you could be adopting some of these things and forestalling and potentially conflicting with a lot of the work of this committee. So I'm very concerned about some of those rulemakings that you can do a fact finding without necessarily having to go through a rulemaking process. It's concerning to me.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and one thing to understand in the process of rulemaking and what has worked well for the Gaming Commission is let's get it out there. Let people see these are our proposals. These are things to look at and then get discussion. I will say, along with you all, we've got a lot of interest in the rules that are out there and posted on our website. That's by design. We want to get that discussion. Some of that we saw from legislation. Some of it, it's very possible we don't have the authority to promulgate those rules. But let's get the discussion going. Let's get the people talking. Let's get everybody at the table and discuss this. It's important.
Bob. Representative Larson, follow up.
So I don't think any of us have any angst with the conversation. Our angst is when the question, are you going to take any action? And then you say, well, that's up to the board. And so we're left there. What does that mean? So you very well could. And so please understand our concern. And we don't have any trouble with you talking about possible rule changes and the impacts and all of that, but I'm just really concerned about taking action. And haven't gotten any assurance that that won't take place.
Chairman Kinski, Representative Larson, and speaking potentially for the commissioners on the Zoom call. The process takes time. And I understand exactly how you feel. I felt the same way several times. But as far as giving you an assurance at this point in time, I'm not sure I'm able to do that other than say, I doubt if any action will be done on these prior to the study and prior to any additional legislation coming. The commission is going to take every step to consider everybody's opinions and look at this. And these are to get the discussion going. End of story.
Co-Chair
As far as
Nicholas.
we're concerned.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. So a couple different things. One, I'd like to get a brief summary from you, Charlie, about we gave you a little extra money to do certain things, to have additional staff members so if you could give us a little update on that. And then I know that we're running short of time, and this isn't going to be our last meeting by any means, but I would like to get some feedback from the board, from the commissioners, the board members, on what their vision is, their personal vision, and as a commission of the future growth for what needs to happen to make it a better experience, and what what help they would like us to provide to you as you fulfill your ideas about that. And that can be before, that can be after we receive this report, but and a lot of this may need to boil down to just to one-on-one conversations, because there's a lot involved in it. And I would direct this to our participants in the audience here. As you can tell, we're not very educated about this. And so as we go through this, there's just a lot that we have to learn and how we have to structure it. We would like to have suggestions of whether or not we can expand the gaming commission, or could reduce the gaming commission, or do we need to divide it into different components? Should we have more professionals involved versus the location, the folks just from different parts of the state? All of those things I think are on the table that we would like to get feedback from, so that we present that and have the best information we have as we start to tinker with the overall statutory construct and the growth and what we then from a legislative standpoint envision the future of this to be. The other thing I'd like to get comments on today, if we can, and in the near future, is what's the current trajectory of what's going to happen in Laramie County, other locations, other off-track betting locations in other counties that are on the horizon, that people are looking interested in, so that we can know what you are looking or what you're hearing, so that we can react to it too. Instead of being reactive, we can be proactive in terms of understanding that process. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'll respond to co-chair's last remarks here. We have one permit that is in front of us, an application for live racing in Laramie County. And with that, additionally, once they're permitted, they would have the opportunity to apply for simulcasting and historic horse racing locations throughout the state, as others are. Currently, that's the extent of that. There's been other individuals that have expressed interest in the state as far as being permitted. We don't have any other applications in front of us at this point on any of those folks. We do have a transfer of ownership that's in front of us that will be considered later on this week, that is moving forward. And that's kind of all the future expansion that we're looking at. We do have several other locations that are proposed around the state. 4 additional locations for historic racing that are on the agenda for approvals and or potentially will be in the near future.
Okay, anything else before we open it for public comment? All right, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
I don't know if you folks have drawn straws to see who's up first, but I came back from break and we had a fairly substantial report here, and I suspect these folks might want to be up first. It looks like you've got all 3 of the licensees joining in on this.
Chairman Kinski, Co-Chairman Nicholas, members of the Joint Appropriations Committee. My name is Macrina Sharp, and I'm an attorney with Holland and Hart and represent Wyoming Horse Racing.
What's the first name?
Macrina.
Okay.
The packet that you just referenced was provided to the committee in advance of the meeting, and hopefully everyone has a hard copy today. But you're correct in that it was put together by all 3 parimutuel operators in Wyoming. So Wyoming Horse Racing, Wyoming Downs, and 307 Horse Racing. And the point of the packet is that we understand that this committee is evaluating all types of gaming, but it's important from a parimutuel perspective that the committee understands what makes us different from the other facets of gaming. And the primary thing that differentiates us, and we've talked about it today, but is the fact that since 1967, parimutuel wagering is specifically designed to support live horse racing. So when we talk about the economic impacts and that the Gaming Commission provided were necessarily discussed in full today, but they provide great information about all of the economic impacts that come from gaming as an industry, the job creation, the spending across multiple industries. The unique part of parimutuel wagering is not only do we benefit the economy in that capacity, but we separately sustain an entirely separate sector of live horse racing. And so if we set gaming aside, I just think it's important to emphasize to this committee how important live horse racing is to Wyoming's economy, because it is important. When you step back and look at all of the individuals and industries it touches, you have farriers, owners, breeders, jockeys, boarding facilities, veterinarians, farmers in Wyoming who are providing hay. You have the tourism dollars that is being brought into the state. And so as this committee evaluates gaming, I hope that they keep in mind that importance. But the problem with live horse racing, and we've seen it, and they talked about in 2010, when horse racing was essentially dead in Wyoming, is that it's an incredibly expensive business. And that's another thing that we haven't really talked about today, is the expenses that go into operating a track and holding 16 days of live horse racing each year. So if you think about those expenses, you have to lease or build your track. You have to maintain the grounds. You have to maintain the grandstands. You have to invest in significant equipment, tractors, motor graders, water trucks to spray. We employ, and this is not just Wyoming Horse Racing. I mean, you have to remember there's 3 operators around the state who have 3 different facilities, and they're all investing millions of dollars to hold these live races. So the point is that live horse racing is incredibly expensive, and it would not be possible without HHR. And we've asked, or the question has been asked today is, well, has HHR really benefited live horse racing? What should we do? Do we need more race days? You've seen in the Gaming Commission's annual report where we are today, and the big figures that are being reported. But I think the perspective that is most helpful is to compare the 2010 figures to the 2023 figures. Now, I don't have the specific details on who the Breeders' Award Fund is paying out to, but what I can tell you is that in 2011, it paid out $9,000 to Wyoming bred horses and owners, breeders, and stallions. And in 2023, it paid out $7 million, or just shy of $7 million. When we look at the races, we went from 0 live horse races in 2010 to 467 races last year. There are 832 accredited Wyoming bred horses. In 2014, only 55 Wyoming bred horses ran in Wyoming races. Last year, 369 Wyoming bred horses participated in Wyoming races. And the purses have grown exponentially. We are approaching nearly $6 million in purses. And now the question has been asked, what can we do to further benefit the industry with the revenue that we're making from HHR? But I would submit to the committee that these figures and the growth in these purses, that's the answer. It's not necessarily the number of races that we're holding, it's the quality of races that we're holding. And it's the payouts that we're paying to Wyomingites and Wyoming bred horses. And obviously is not lost on this committee that not only has HHR benefited the industry, but it has benefited the state. In the past 10 years, but HHR alone, so no other forms of payment, has generated $133 million that has been paid directly to the state to fund the Gaming Commission, to LISRA, to the Breeders' Award Fund, and to the municipalities. The packet that we've provided, and I hope that if you haven't had an opportunity to review it, that you do, it attaches at the end an economic impact study that all 3 operators had put together. And that study looks at not just those direct impacts that HHR has had on Wyoming, but the ripple effect. So between the induced and the direct economic impact, it estimates that in 2022, the live horse racing industry as a whole generated just over $150 million in annual economic output for Wyoming. So those are significant numbers that we just want the committee to keep in mind as it goes through the study. The second and last point that I want to talk about with the committee is the taxes. I think that it's been super helpful today to hear the statutory allocations, but I think what's more helpful to really understand how much money there is and where it's going and how it's being distributed is to walk through an example. And so if you have that packet in front of you, it's 6 pages in. So the first page is going to be our key points. And then there's a letter. And so it's on page 5 of that letter. Yes. So when you get there, it's the Evanston location. This is just a snippet that we pulled from the Gaming Commission's website. The HHR revenue reports are all public record, and you can see exactly how much money is coming in at each location from each operator from each HHR platform. So if we look at this, I think it's a great example to help us understand where the money is and where it's going. So this is an example of Wyoming Horse Racing's HHR platform at its Evanston location. So in the top left corner, we have the handle. So that means all of the dollars that were wagered. That's your whole pot. We've talked about pooling our money. So the handle is all of the dollars that have been bet. Below that are the statutorily set taxes that immediately come out of that pool. So you see that we have 0.25% that goes to the state treasurer. That's the money that's paid to fund the Gaming Commission. The next 0.25% goes to the LISRA. The next percent is split between cities and counties where that facility, that OTB, is located. And then 0.4% goes to that Breeders' Award Fund that we've talked about that incentivizes Wyoming bred horses to run in Wyoming races. So when you add all of those up, HHR operators are paying 1.9% off the total handle in taxes. Below that, you see the figures that the licensee or the operator, in this case, Wyoming Horse Racing, is allowed to retain. The breakage, that just means the rounding down of bets. So it's a small margin that the statute allows operators to keep. But the important number is listed next to licensee. And if you go over, it says 6.79%. This is a really important thing for the committee to keep in mind as it moves forward. The Pari-Mutuel Wagering Act allows operators to retain up to 25%. But the reality is that no operator in Wyoming retains nearly that much money because competition wouldn't allow for it. The more an operator withholds, the less money in the pot going back to the bettors and the less customers that you're going to have returning. So if you look at the Gaming Commission's reports, you'll see that operators only retain probably on average between 6 and 9%. So in this instance, you can see that the operator retained just under $236,000. So those are the two major takeaways. On a $3.5 million handle, an operator can expect to make about $236,000, and they can expect to pay about $66,000 in taxes. And when you do the math, you realize that those taxes are significant. That's between 20 and 25% taxes on gross revenue. I submit that that's probably more than most industries ever pay. Now, once those funds are all taken out, what you're left with is what goes back to the bettor. And so in that instance, $3,167,000 some odd dollars goes back to the bettors. So on average, 90 cents out of every dollar wagered goes back to Wyoming bettors.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Anderson.
Just so I'm clear, this is just on historic horse racing associated with the Evanston track, but it is not the live horse racing take. It's just the HHR.
Right. So sorry, Mr. Chairman. That's correct. So this is one OTB in Evanston, and it's the HHR machines at that OTB. So the overall figures that I'm providing, I'm just talking about HHR because in this instance, HHR is the elephant. It's where all the money is coming from in large part. And so that's where we focused kind of the overview. But those are the important factors for us. We really want.
Representative Larson. Sorry.
No.
Karina.
So thank you. I'm curious why you, on the Breeders' Cup Award Fund, that, you know, when you look at taxes, you generally think that those taxes come back for the operation of state government. That 40% comes back directly back to the industry. And we've heard, I think, today how valuable, important that is to the industry. That's an industry I'm just struggling to see where that's a tax that is against that doesn't benefit the industry.
Sure.
And so if we're looking for reductions, would that be one that they would be in favor of doing away with?
Mr. Chairman.
Please.
That's a good question. No, that's incredibly important for Wyoming. And whether you refer to it as a tax or a contribution back to the industry, the bottom line and the point of the overview is not necessarily to show where money should or should not go. What we hope that the committee understands is what the operator is taking, right? These are all amounts that are taken out of the gross revenue that go to something other than the operator. But the Breeders' Award Fund is incredibly important, and it incentivizes, we've talked about that economic cycle. It does incentivize people to breed horses and keep them in Wyoming and run them in Wyoming and use Wyoming vets and use Wyoming hay and other goods and services. That's all part of stimulating our economy. Horse racing is so expensive. To breed a horse, oftentimes, people are operating at a loss. And so those points are meant to defer that cost of breeding, right? And incentivize it. But no one is getting rich off of those points. Half of horses that are bred are even going to make it to race, and only 20% of those are ever going to win a race. So those points are an important item for the industry.
Representative Stith.
Mr. Chairman, Two questions, Ms. Sharp. Thank you so much. And I appreciate your focus on the economics because it sounds like live horse racing essentially as a standalone business is a bad business, right? But the machines are a good business. You put the two together and you make money. I appreciate that. So our policy question that we're facing is, I think one of the questions we're going to be facing this year is, should there be any limit on how many machines you can have, right? That's kind of the policy question we'll be grappling with. And the next secondary, so I would like your view on that. I mean, from the industry's perspective, my guess is you don't want any limit because the machines are good business. You'd want to just keep expanding it as much as the market will bear. I mean, we've created this rather weird government enforced oligopoly right now, but I don't think we're going to repeal the statutory framework for it. And the next question is tax policy. You made a really good point, I thought, that although we nominally tax the gross as a net equivalent, it's about 20% or so. Skill-based amusement games also 20%. Online sports wagering is 10%. So the second part of the question is, do you believe that there's any virtue to tax parity, tax harmony between the three kinds of gaming?
Mr. Chairman.
Please.
I'll take those out of order and start with the second one. The biggest thing, and I have to be careful because I can't speak on behalf of 307 Horse Racing or Wyoming Downs and how they feel about expansion. But what I can say that I think pretty confidently as an industry is that all types of gaming have to be evaluated separately. And our point is that when you look at skill-based amusement games or online sports wagering, they don't have this massive expense. They're not funding an entirely separate industry. So when we look at taxation, I suppose that's what we would hope the committee keeps in mind, is that parimutuel wagering is unique in that it has entirely separate responsibilities that other types of gaming doesn't have. So I don't think there's a way to uniformly tax these different types of gaming because they are so unique and they have to be each evaluated independently. When it comes for expansion, that is a hard one to say. All I can say is that from Wyoming Horse Racing's perspective is that we want to work with the committee, and I know the other operators want to work with the committee to figure out the answer to responsible growth. Like Chairman Nicholas mentioned, this is the first meeting, and we know that this is going to be a long study. So when it comes to responsible growth and when it comes to limits on expansion, we want to hear what the committee thinks the solution is, and then we want to be part of the dialogue. And so I can't say sitting here today exactly everyone's position, but I know that moving forward that we are happy to have that dialogue and work with the committee to find the solution.
Thank you, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Along those lines, please, if you would, share your view and the industry or the principal operator's perspective on the role and involvement of the public in this process.
Mr. Chairman.
Please.
That's a great question. And it's something that we have struggled with as when you look at the Parimutuel Wagering Act, the Gaming Commission is the sole regulatory body that should be regulating gaming in Wyoming. But what we've seen is that there's 23 different counties, some of which offer simulcasting, and all of them have competing interests, right? And all of their constituents, all of those citizens have competing interests and conflicting views on parimutuel wagering and surely other types of gaming. And so when it comes to regulating the industry and considering all of those interests, that is why it's so important to have a strong gaming commission with the tools and the resources to exclusively regulate us, because there are so many varying interests and they are the ones who have the expertise, who can consider the voice of the counties, who can consider the voice of the constituents and decide what's best for Wyoming. But the authority needs to rest with the Gaming Commission in order for the system to work.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding this page 5 exhibit, because I thought I heard you talk about, I thought this was a day at the live races. But then you said it actually represents the HHR, which is the machines at its Evanston OTB. So these are not machines located at the racetrack. These are machines located at Wyoming Horse Racing's operations just in Evanston that are remote from the racetrack?
Mr. Chairman, that's a great question. Wyoming Horse Racing has 9 locations, and one more coming in Cheyenne. This is the OTB in Evanston. So
And the
this,
OTB is their location, their year-round location.
correct.
Okay.
So these figures aren't correlated to live racing and parimutuel wagering that occurs on live racing. But the majority of the tax revenue that the state is getting obviously comes from HHR, right? Which is these machines. So this was simply intended to give the committee an example to walk through to see what percentages are coming out and what percentage is going to the operator.
Okay, and this is 1 day of operation?
No, this is 1 month.
1 month of operation. And so there might have been no live horse racing during this month of operation.
That's correct.
Okay. And then earlier you said that it's an expensive business because they have to build and maintain their own racetracks. Wyoming Horse Racing owns 8 racetracks and operates them and maintains them.
Mr. Chairman, so the way that the Parimutuel Wagering Act works is that in order to have a simulcast permit, you have to run 16 days of live horse racing. There's no requirement on where those 16 days are run. So Wyoming Horse Racing, 307 Horse Racing, Wyoming Downs, they all each have a track and they each run 16 days at that track. Now, separate and apart from that, we have HHR machines and OTBs that are located all around the state. And those run 364, I believe.
No, I
days a
get
year.
that. I'm just trying to figure out, do they own these tracks? Or are they using the county racetrack for a day or what? They own and operate their own racetracks.
I can speak for Wyoming Horse Racing. I'm not entirely sure on Wyoming Downs and 307, but we lease ours. It's a 5-year lease and we have capital improvement commitments that we have to make to that track. So that is a significant investment for Wyoming Horse Racing, and I'm sure a significant investment for the other 2 operators.
Representative Larson or Walters?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Couple questions, if I may. First, starting on the purses, and you've said purses have continued to increase. The purses are set by each of the operators independently. If that's the case, would there be value in those being set by rule so that every operator on a percentage basis had the same amount of purse so that there wasn't a value in, or so horses weren't trying to run in one operator's races versus another because the amount of the purse would be set equally and it really goes to the horseman as an advantage to the horseman versus to the operators. My first question.
Mr. Chairman.
Please.
That's a great question. That one comes down to competition, right? The purse entices horsemen from both Wyoming and out of state. The higher the purse, the more enticing the race. So how each operator sets that, all I can say is that competition is good. Competition drives those purses up. And so I haven't given thought, and potentially that is whether or not the committee wanted to discuss, setting an exact amount. But I think right now, as the system works, it's benefiting the horsemen because the competition is driving those up.
Please.
Let me follow up on that question.
Okay.
So if we did that, then part of that purse comes out of that 6 to 9% of the proceeds that the operators are giving back. So by doing that, basically you would make it non-competitive. You'd have the same purse at each racetrack, but the racetracks are run differently, and that means you couldn't have a higher purse at a different location. So that would be I think that would be kind of counterproductive in some ways, but just thinking of the opposite impact.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's a great point. I think it's positive to have multiple competitors enticing horsemen. That's how the horsemen get paid more. But it's an interesting thought, something I hadn't considered.
Representative, I'd like to follow up on his follow-up. I guess I don't understand what incentive there is for an operator to run any greater number of horses than the bare minimum required, horse races than the bare minimum required by statute. To quote Representative Stiff, horse racing is losing money business, HHR is a making money business. And you got to maintain, you talked about all the huge expenses associated with the track and so forth. And they have to close their location during live events, is my understanding. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, the competitors, if they don't have a waiver, have to close their OTBs within 100 miles of the live race.
Okay. And so what's the incentive? You know, why as an operator would I give a rip about how many horses I attract if I just run a race, if I run my 15 races and I go about making money on my HHR? Where's the incentive to really build horse racing, live horse racing events all across the state? I'm not seeing an incentive for the three licensees.
Mr. Chairman, I think there's absolutely an incentive. You know, each business has a reputation, and each business, frankly, is very invested in live horse racing and cares deeply about live horse racing. I mean, we're not dealing with operators who are just doing this because, you know, it's their means to get to HHR. I mean, my client my clients specifically have decades and decades in this industry. They care about live horse racing, but the answer, I think, is it goes back to the Gaming Commission. If they feel as if an operator isn't doing their part, if they're not abiding by the Pari-Mutuel Wagering Act, if they're not furthering, you know, live horse racing in Wyoming, then they have the opportunity to address that with the operators. They can fail to, you know, reapprove permits. They have that regulatory authority. And that's why they're so important to ensure that all operators fulfill the purpose of the act.
I kind of follow the money, you know, great that they have passion, regulatory stick, but if there's money and if you can make money, there'll be more live horse racing. And I'm still not seeing the incentive. Back to Representative, we're stepping on Representative Walters' time. I'm sorry.
No worries. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While we're continuing these various conversations, the breakage, it's different between operators, higher and lower, and you see the amount of, and it attributes to the increased profit for the operator because the operator gets to retain the breakage. If we change that to where all the breakage went to the state, benefit all of us sitting up here far more. Would that change the way the operators chose and where the operators chose to do their breakage? Because they're allowed a variety or a scale in which they can do it. And as I said, some do it higher, some lower. If we took that away from their profits and took it to the state, would that be beneficial? Or should we just set it at a rate and say all of them will use breakage at the same amount? Your thoughts?
Mr. Chairman, that's exactly right. I think the statute allows them, it's to the nearest 10 cent, I believe. That's a good thought. But what I would go back to emphasizing to the committee is the fact that the operators are already paying between 20 and 25% taxes on their gross revenue. And when you compare that to other industries in Wyoming, it's significant. And so when we start looking at increasing that even more and increasing the amount of money that goes to the state, I think it's worth keeping in mind already how much we pay. But if that is a consideration of the committee, I mean, there's absolutely room in the statutory language for operators to operate differently. And I could see how that you'd have different numbers.
Okay. And then a quick question and a follow-up. Cost of running a live race day. Over the years, I've heard some people say it costs $1 million a day to run a live race day. Your report here says it costs $1 million a season. I'd like to try and maybe you can't answer that today. Try and understand just a ballpark average, what it costs. And in that cost, does that include the payout of the races? Because if you're giving back 90% of the wagering for the day, is that part of the, say, $1 million a day or a season? Or really, what is the cost? The tractors, the track people, the actual gone to the wind type of cost for not the wagers to the betting public. So what is your estimate? And maybe you don't have that today.
Mr. Chairman, it's hard, right? And as the attorney for Wyoming horse racing, my best estimate that I can tell you is probably a race season will cost anywhere from $1 to $3 million. And those are just operational costs, right? And then on top of that, you have our purses. And between the three operators, purses are approaching $6 million. I could estimate that on average, they're employing 50 people. If you do the math across the season, that's potentially $650,000 on payroll. But it's a great follow-up question and something that the operators can help inform the committee on, and I can get more specific detailed information on those types of expenses.
And final question, if I may, Mr. Chairman,
Please.
is on the tax rate. Online sports wagering, skill games, we tax on a net. And on historic horse racing and horse racing in general, we tax on the churn or the total handle. Your example talks about the total handle, which is the churn. But it's hard to determine really what's all included. If I put in $20 and play for the next 3 hours and leave with $15, I'm only net down in my pocket $5. But I may have wagered in that time 10,000, who knows? And so trying to understand what is, we see a $1.8 billion industry wide for the year total handle, but really we're trying to understand how much money is actually wagered, how many new dollars enter the system and how many dollars exit the system, not how many of the same dollars are played over and over at one wagering time. And so then it comes to a larger question of readjusting the tax rate to be based on a net basis versus on a total churn where we could compare an apples to apples. Any thought to that? And do you have any estimate of what is the actual net that we start to then take a tax on versus the gross?
Mr. Chairman.
Please.
I think that is the unique thing about pari-mutuel wagering and kind of the misconception that we want to make sure that we clear up is that the handle is the total dollars wagered. That's it. And the way that pari-mutuel wagering works is then there's a portion that's taken off the top, and that's set by statute. And once that portion is taken off, all the remaining dollars are paid back to the bettors. And when you look at the Gaming Commission's reports, they show all of those figures. They show the total dollars handle, the total dollars wagered, which is the handle. They show the commissions that are taken out. That breaks it down between the city and counties, LISRA, state, Breeders' Award Fund. Those are separately accounted for. And you see the payout that was made back to Wyoming bettors. So there is a lot of transparency in pari-mutuel wagering. And so as the committee evaluates those numbers and decides what they want to do, there's a wealth of information that should provide that information. The only thing you're not seeing is then the back end costs of live horse racing, right? Because what you can see is each operator's gross takeout. But that's why we're emphasizing that from that money, then they fund live horse racing, then they support that industry. So that's the only area where you're not able to see what the operator's net revenue is, but you can see every operator's gross takeout.
Representative Larson.
So if I could go back to the conversation you were having with Chairman Kinski on money and the value of supporting live horse racing and its contributions and the dedication of our current operators in making sure well into the future that live horse racing is maintained, right? But am I not understanding that one of those operators is in the process of trying to sell or transfer?
Mr. Chairman.
Please.
I don't know. I think that's probably making remarks on behalf of the industry. That's probably not within my wheelhouse to comment on. But I'm sure there's other representatives here today who could answer your question.
Okay. Senator Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, just a few things. You asked why the live horse racing guys would continue. I was an operator and I was a Wyoming breeder. And I can tell you as an operator, you're naive thinking that maybe if you have a few more horses and a few more races, you're going to make some money. And it just works that way. And you're always optimistic that if I just added one more race, I'd make some money. And we couldn't do it. And so I called your friend Ken Schiffer at Santa Anita Track and asked him, how do you do this? And he told me, put up $10,000 for a trifecta and watch how it works. We put up 10,000 for the trifecta and we made money that year. Big money. They flew in from Chicago to bet when it became $50,000 on that trifecta. It went to about 80,000 before somebody won it. And we really did well that year. We couldn't do that the next year. 3 years later, live horse racing was dead in Wyoming, not just at our track, but in Wyoming. So I really appreciate what you're talking about. This is before HHR. We didn't have any outside money coming in. And HHR is really important. And it's important for this organization to understand HHR and live racing is completely different from all these other gaming things that we have going on. Social gambling, charitable, skill-based nursing, or skill-based amusement, Wyoming lottery, tribal casinos. None of those put any money into live horse racing. So that's why it's important that she's saying we want to be understood as being different than these others. And I know my constituents are getting tired of seeing all these gambling places, but HHR is not the problem. It's all the other gambling places that they're seeing sprout up that do not support our horse racing. And I supported HHR in the beginning because it did support the live racing, but I don't support all these other gambling things that do not support everything in the state. So I really appreciate you making the point that HHR and live horse racing are a lot different than these other organizations. Thank you.
Do you think you can answer that question?
It's just a lot more eloquent than mine was.
Okay. Anything else? We peppered you with questions. Did you have more in your presentation?
No, I suppose all I'd like to say is on behalf of the industry, we know this is a long study. We know we need strong regulatory oversight. And so we want to be part of the process and the dialogue, and we'll be here and we will participate however the committee thinks would be helpful.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Sharp. Okay, next up.
Okay, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Eugene Joyce from Wyoming Horse Racing.
Good to see you again, Eugene.
Yeah, it's nice to be seen. I was the knucklehead that Charlie Moore convinced to come back here in 2011 and try to start up the horse racing industry again. Started Wyoming Horse Racing LLC. We struggled for 2 years running 4 race dates a year in Rock Springs at Sweetwater Downs. We went to the legislature and we got this incredible gift, this incredible tool from the legislature of historic horse racing. Now, we didn't pick this out of thin air. I had some friends in Kentucky Downs. One was the gentleman sitting to my right, Nick Hughes, who is the president and part owner of Wyoming Horse Racing LLC. And they told us about this and we went and we pitched. Now, you would think that the Commonwealth of Kentucky, which is the gold standard of horse racing in North America, wouldn't need historic horse racing, but they did. They had surrounding states that had given casinos to racetracks, competing racetracks to them, and they were losing brood mares, and it was impacting their breeding and their racing industry. So, period, paragraph, turn the page. 10 years later, where we're at right now, it's an incredible success story, not only for Wyoming, but in the United States. I got involved with horses out of love. I wish sometimes I'd fall in love with dice and cards, but I fell in love with horses. And the love of the horse is really what propels our entire industry. And I'm going to share some statistics with you to illustrate that. If you added up the total amount of money that is spent on horses at auctions in the United States and compared it with the purse money in one given year, Okay, purse money is about 1/10 of what people pay for horses to go after that. Our industry, more than any other industry I know, is built on hope. No person commits suicide with a good 2-year-old in their barn because that's the horse that's going to win the Kentucky Derby next year. So if I can further illustrate, if we look at these people that have invested in the Wyoming bred program, how do they start? How do they get involved? You need a broodmare. What are you going to pay for a broodmare? $10,000 for a pretty good one. Let's say you spend $5,000 for one. Now you're going to need to pay a stud fee to get her in full. And a good stud in these parts is $5,000. Mediocre one is $1,500. Let's say it's $2,000. So now you don't have a ranch or a pasture. I don't. I should hook up with Representative Walters maybe in the future. But I've got to pay to have that horse, graze on somebody else's grass. That's about $18 a day. So if you follow my math here, the amount of money for pasture feed for 9 months, and that's about the gestation period of a broodmare, is $5,000. Okay. Once she foals, okay, you have to come up with pasture for the weanling and the yearling.
Sorry, if I can, we've got 4 people waiting to testify. It's 1:30. We're breaking at noon, and you've got skills-based and other people behind you. So we need is concision.
I'll cut to the chase.
There you go.
In order to get a horse to the racetrack, it's about $25,000. Okay. And even when you get the horse to the racetrack, if you're going to train them for the next year, the training fees are about $10,000. Okay. The owner is going to pay $10,000. The available money for the Wyoming bred program for the owners is 40% of that, 6.8 million, about 3.7 million. If you times that by the 369 horses that are in training, you come up with an amount of money that's about $1.5 million short. Nobody's getting rich. And going back to Representative Nicholas's question, we can provide you with the answers of who makes the money. There are people like Dan and Carol Lee in Riverton. Okay, Dr. Whip and his family, Whitey Call and Sheridan. These are people that have been involved in the breeding industry for 20, 30 years. Okay, back when there was hardly any money. So again, great questions from the committee. We will follow up with information regarding that. But I want to assure you that the money is really built on hope. And just to quickly answer the question about the number of race days. The number of race days is dependent on the number of horses. And the number of horses is a lagging indicator. If I see the money for the breed program and the purse money and decide I want to race, it's 3 years before I can get a horse to the track. And so the expansion of number of race days, we needed to infill the amount of money on any given race day. If I have a racehorse, I can race him 6 or 7 times based on the calendar in Wyoming. So every time I run that horse, I want to run for the most amount of money possible. And so I think we've done a heck of a job as an industry to infill that, to grow the purses, and to give the owners a shot at making some money. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Nick Hughes. And despite his British accent, he is an American citizen, but I'm sorry.
Representative Stith has a question.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Royce, thank you so much for that economic explanation. We as members of the legislature certainly understand putting a lot of time, money, and effort into an activity that doesn't really pay much back to you. So thank you very much.
Found a kindred soul.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, senators, representatives, I will keep this short, but I can't talk quickly because you'll struggle to understand my accent. But he is right. I'm a proud American citizen for the last 5-6 years, for the 13 years that I've been here.
Could you just introduce yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry. Nick Hughes.
Okay.
Been in the gaming industry 49 years. Started when I was 12. Not really. We came to America because of Kentucky Downs. I was one of the founding partners of Kentucky Downs. Stayed in the country, and we purchased Wyoming Horse Racing about 2.5 years ago. I was actually part of the 2013 team that tried to introduce and successfully introduced, with the help of the commission and with Eugene, HHR back in 2013. We managed with a different company that I owned. We managed WHR for about 3 years, Wyoming Horse Racing, the company, for 3.5 years, 2014 to 2017. Here's what, if I could answer some of the questions that I think were asked but not quite answered during this day, and I'll keep it brief. In no particular order, I think Representative Waters, you asked about the 21-year-old needing to be, and 18-year-old, that disparity in. We, as an industry, we particularly, I'm sure everyone else did, we took the self-regulatory decision we could allow 18-year-olds, but we don't. We card people, they need to be 21. There was a question about how much does it cost on a daily basis to run horses. I can't tell you that. What I can tell you is that we lose $1 million a year at Sweetwater. That's pure operational cost. The cost of the operation minus what we bring in bets. That race season, 16 days, we're doing 18 days this year. So we are increasing. But we lose $1 million a year. Quite frankly, if we didn't have HHR, you wouldn't have us. I'm a businessman. I have horses. We have Kentucky bred horses. I have my own horses. But I'm a businessman, and without getting into past history, I come from a very humble working class background. It took me a lot of years to get wherever I am. And believe me, I wouldn't put money into a business if it didn't work. Racing in this state only exists because of HHR. And it will go away if HHR isn't managed responsibly. And that leads us on to another whole different subject, which is something I think everybody's going to be looking at in the future. What is responsible gaming? Wyoming is not Las Vegas. We cannot keep multiplying the way we're multiplying. We will be market led. Each operator out of the 3 existing operators, we may have different viewpoints, but we run similar businesses and similar business ethics. Some of the questions you're going to be asking, with Mr. Moore and his team, you're asking about, should we limit the number of terminals? I don't know the answer. I know there's a ton of options and a ton of questions. Perhaps you limit the number of locations, because I would say to you something that was said earlier by Senator Anderson. I think the public perception is not the fact that there's X amount of terminals here, X amount there. What they're saying is, I'm seeing locations pop up on every street corner. And again, Wyoming is not Las Vegas. But that's what I think is causing everything. Now, I'm not saying the answer is to reduce locations. What I'm saying is, we as an industry will work, the existing industry will work with you and be part of the discussion to help fund and investigate responsible gaming. The funding that we do is clear from the numbers that you've seen. We support horse racing. 100% we support horse racing. As a company, and this is the last thing I'll say, we are slightly different, not any better. We all work very closely together, but we have a slightly different philosophy. When my company is Pacesetter Racing and Gaming, PRG, we bought WHR. I'm the president of both companies. When we bought, we had 8 locations. Today we have 9 after 2.5 years. We haven't expanded. I mean, unless you count the 65 unit location in downtown Cheyenne. Where we're expanding is to copy what we did in Kentucky, where Kentucky Downs was in Franklin, Kentucky, but happened to be 35 miles away from Nashville, Tennessee. We took, in 2011, a dead industry in Kentucky and turned it into and the horse racing industry is the signature industry of Kentucky. It's not bourbon, it's not beer, it's horse racing. We now, through bringing HHR into Kentucky, revitalize the industry, incredibly revitalize it. There were 9 locations, 5 were due to close. None have. In fact, some have opened. Our philosophy is we are opening touristic OTBs, exactly what we did in Kentucky. We have one that's due to be finished and a grand opening in June, which is a bigger location, but it's a bigger amenity. Why? Because we're attracting the Colorado gamer that currently goes to Black Hawk. They're closer to us. They come to us, hopefully, if we've done our work right. But we will generate with Colorado dollars, gaming dollars, Wyoming taxation. We're doing the same thing in Evanston that will be about a year away for the Utah market. Now, I'm not saying what we're doing is drastically different. We just have a different mindset. We're not looking to drastically increase those 9 footprints. We're looking at the touristic dollar. Those 2 touristic OTBs will equal what we do now. In tax revenue, our 9 existing does about $6 million in tax payments. The 2 touristics, when they're fully operational, will do the same. 2 locations against 9. So the only thing I can tell you is that we're proud to be in Wyoming. We are fortunate to be in Wyoming, and we accept more than anybody else that Wyoming isn't Las Vegas. Don't let it become it. Thank you.
Next.
Mr. Chairman, my name's Kyle Ridgway. I'm the president of 307 Horse Racing. We are a Wyoming-owned and operated live horse racing company here in Wyoming. I just had specific things that were brought up in a discussion with Ms. Sharp earlier that I wanted to provide additional color for you on related to specific questions. Mr. Chairman, with regard to Representative Henderson's question related to public input, just so that everybody understands the process to either OTB or live race. First, there has to be an election in the county that has occurred at some point. Second, you would go to the county commissioners and get approval either to run live horse races or have an OTB. Now, there are issues related to the language of those resolutions that can be discussed in a number of different ways. And we've been working with the County Commissioners Association for some time and individual counties to try to get that part right. Because one of the things that did historically happen is you had approvals that were maybe a little more ambiguous on locations and the right to revisit and those kinds of things. That's something that this committee is probably going to have to address at some point during the study. The cities, while they don't get to have a formal approval, many of them have zoning requirements that you have to go through. For example, in the city of Cheyenne or the city of Rollins, there are special use permits that you have to get on top of your county approval to receive the OTB. Then you take all that to the Gaming Commission, and the Gaming Commission has to approve it. So there are multiple layers of public input, just so that that's clear. A second point I would make is all the HHR locations and all the skills games locations are in-person brick and mortar facilities. And there is a difference, and there are a number of studies that are coming out that this committee should look at about the difference between online versus in-person in terms of responsible gaming. You know, at all our derby clubs, we have multiple employees on site that are supervising folks, that are watching how people are playing. as opposed to what can happen online. There was a big Wall Street Journal article that came out a couple months ago about interactive gaming in Pennsylvania that you all should read, because related to expansion, I think this committee first should make sure we're getting the existing forms right before we consider other forms. I think all operators would agree on that. With regard to Chairman Kinski's question related to what's the incentive to put on quality races, something that nobody's talked about yet is that under the Gaming Commission rules and by statute, to be licensed, we have to have what's called a horseman's agreement. That is a contract between the live horse racing operator and a horseman's association, which is a corporation. Ours is with the Wyoming All Breeds Racing Association, which is a corporation in Wyoming made up of Wyoming breeders and live horse racing folks that has a board, and we have to enter into an agreement with them. And our agreement with them governs what purse money is offered. Because there are other tracks in the state, the Wyoming All Breeds Association has to work with multiple operators, which means they can play them against each other to obtain the purse money that they want. And then we have to submit our horseman's agreement to the Gaming Commission for review before we're licensed. So that's an important fact, that the horsemen have a contractual right to participate in the negotiation of what's offered for purposes of our license. I would agree. In addition, I think some of these other things related to the locations specifically can be dealt with by regulation in terms of what the look and feel of a facility needs to be like. You know, these HHR locations, I think, are pretty safe in that you have employees that are on site specifically. We look forward to, I guess the last thing I would say that I think Mr. Joyce emphasized is there is a time lag with this industry. 307 Horse Racing received its license in 2020. We are the third operator. Our race meet starts May 25th. We will have $2 million of purse money available at that meet, which is the most purse money that's ever been available in the history of Wyoming. And then I know Wyoming Downs right after us will probably do more because that's how it works. We get to be first, but then we don't get the credit. But it's important to say that in 3 years, you know, our commitment to the racing industry has been significant because we were founded by a horseman from Gillette, Wyoming, Jack Greer and his family. And the focus of this business has always been on live horse racing. And in my opinion, if you want to regulate the HHR industry properly, the focus should always be on how we do live racing right. What are the rules around live racing so that it's safe, so that it's sustainable, so that there's enough horses? Because the idea that you would look at how many machines there should be, how much money you should be able to make on the machines. You can't have that conversation in isolation without looking at what do you want the live racing industry in Wyoming to be? And what you want the live racing industry in Wyoming to be should dictate what you want to do to HHR. Because if you cap HHR in some arbitrary way, everybody gets this many machines, then you're potentially capping what can happen to the racing industry in Wyoming. Now, we have certain environmental factors, namely the winter, that is going to handicap what can happen in Wyoming over the course of a year because you only have so many days to run safely. And that's where the regulation comes in. Can we run, do we want 3 tracks running races at the same time? Is that safe? Is that not safe? Do we have a sustainable horse population that's grown with the money? That's the other part of this that should be considered. So I would encourage the committee, when we're looking as a matter of policy, what rules do we want to put around the gaming? It should be driven by what we want the industry of live horse racing to look like. Those are the comments that I had.
Thank you.
Could you send us that, or provide LSO that copy of that Wall Street article?
Absolutely. I think he's got a question.
Mr. Chairman.
We want a copy of that Wall Street Journal article is the request. Representative Stith.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ridgway, thank you. Tell us about, well, so live horse racing. Do you make money on it as a standalone business? I'm assuming you're in the same spot where it would not be sustainable as a standalone business, that you lose money on the live horse racing. I'm assuming that's true, but I also would like you to address the current situation where on a live race day, during the live race that you sponsor, your competitors have to shut down their machines within 100 miles. And is that a good thing or a bad thing? And how much distortion does that create in the market?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stiff, your first question, I think, was, do the races make money? They have not made money for us to this point, though we do have a business plan over a number of years that we think we can get that to a place where we can make money in terms of turning it into a Cheyenne Frontier Days like circumstance where there are concerts and other forms of entertainment associated with the race meet. Now, to do that, you have to be prepared to spend millions of dollars to bring the right people in. That's why I say there's a lag. We've been in the industry for 3 years. If you start having 2, 3, 4 additional operators come in, it can potentially upset the business plan of the folks that you've already had in place who are trying to build a sustainable model around the live racetrack. There are racetracks and racing events that do make money depending on how they're organized, if you can attract enough traffic. Now, that may be a pipe dream, that may be hope, as we've said, but we do have a model that we think can make it sustainable if you turn it into an entertainment event. Some of the fair and rodeos that we do here in Wyoming work well. So we've been working towards that, but we have to have the foundation of revenue to get to that. Your second question, the statute said originally the idea was that you would want to protect the racetrack. So if you are the one running the races, but you're not the one that has the machines in the community should ensure that the focus is on the race meet itself. I don't know that policy matters given the reality of where the industry is at. There are models in other states where they've said, if this is your racetrack, your circumstance around that, you're the one that gets the gaming because the money supports that specific track. I don't believe that right now they close from post to post time open, post time close only is the current interpretation unless there's a waiver. We do have a waiver with one specific operator. We haven't really ever sat down and negotiated with another operator for our track for, variety of political reasons. But I don't know that materially impacts that operator to shut their location down from post time to post time for 6 weekends in May and June. I mean, they could speak to that. We don't have any locations in Evanston where that track operates. The location that we have in Rock Springs or in Sweetwater County, we have a waiver before we came to that community. So we've understood that if we were going to be in a community where racing occurred, that money should support the racing that's occurring in that community in some form or fashion. I don't know if that directly answers your question, but that's the best I can do.
Okay. Wyoming Downs, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tracy Laycock, General Counsel for Wyoming Downs. Out of an interest of time, and we've taken up a lot of time the industry has today, and I think on very important topics. Just a couple of points of clarification. Wyoming Downs is the only owned track in Wyoming. That's in Evanston. And we own and operate our track out of Evanston. But I would be happy to stand for any questions, but we're here happy to be part of the process and happy to provide any information we can.
Thank you. Questions for Wyoming Downs?
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Stitt.
Just briefly, same question on expansion. Do you think there should be any limit on the number of machines, or do you think you should just have as many machines as the market will bear?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stitt. So that's a great question and a difficult question from an industry perspective, but I think that the other operators have really hit the nail on the head, which is that one thing that's unique is we're supporting an entire agriculture industry with what we do and how we do it. And it doesn't just take one location, right? It takes many locations to be able to operate horse racing and to continue that agricultural breakdown of, It's not just the track, but it's all the people that work at the track. It's not just the OTB, but it's all the people that work at the OTB. So I think that that's why I would encourage you to look at that 2022 study that we provided. I think it's a complicated question, and we're here at the table to help look through solutions if that's what the commission desires.
Thank you. So what we're going to do is we'll go ahead and break for lunch until 1. When we come back at 1, we will close out horses and the skills-based, and I think the online folks wanted an opportunity to testify, which we'll open that up for a half hour. So let's all be back here at 1 o'clock.